Can I get everyone in the room to come and grab a seat? You're welcome to bring your food to the chair. We've got 2 more amazing panels and another round of lightning talks, and then an incredible keynote evening lecture. So we've got a great afternoon in store. We're going to have another coffee break for more networking, some more coffee, good food. It's great to have all of you here. I've seen lots of great conversations happening in the space, which is exactly why we do this. So more to come. So as everyone's taking their seat, I'll introduce just very briefly Robert Wright, the Dean of the Forestry Department, landscape architect, and the departmental position that you have that's in the Landscape Architecture Department.
Center for Landscape Research.
Center for Landscape Research. Rob will do some more introductions to his panel. So if the wood supply chain panel would come forward, we will get started. Rob Wright.
It's green. It's not. And we're missing Lars.
He's just getting mic'd up.
We've lost you. Yeah, that's just in the order. We're good. No, Lars is not. No. Yeah, we've changed it up. We've got it in the order. We're good. So welcome everybody to the third panel. As Scott was saying, I'm the Dean of Forestry, but as I always joke with the faculty, I'm the least qualified forester in the whole faculty. But I am very interested, and I've been working with Ann Coven on the Mass Timber Institute around issues of wood and construction. And one of the areas that I have been slowly learning about is that every group I have talked about in terms of mass timber or the use of wood in construction or really promoting, wood in Canada has talked to me about supply chain. And this panel is really about from the forest to the city in terms of that supply chain. And I recognize how critical that is. Ann and I had a really interesting conversation with the Aboriginal Business Centre of Canada. And the first thing they mentioned when we said, what are you guys interested in? They said supply chain. Because everybody knows, if you saw Michael's presentation last night, this whole notion about vertical integration from the forest to the construction site to recycling and materials is like key to this whole process of getting wood being used. When I was at Nordic Structures in Montreal, what was interesting talking to them is they're really into that vertical integration, even to the point of buying transportation companies to make sure that wood can be delivered on time, and integrating support from both government, industry, and construction and development industry to really push the use of the product is where the key to success is. So we have 4 really interesting and diverse members. The first person that we'll talk today is Rob Keane, who is CEO of Forests Ontario. And if you know their work, their work as a registered charity has been amazing, particularly in Ontario, in promoting wood products. And as we know, governments come and go, but the amount of work that our NGOs do in this area is incredible. They really do promote the use of basic forest planting, trees, and one of the things that I'm also working on, particularly in the Faculty of Forestry, is eventually a new program in urban forestry. And the connection between the north and the south, I think, is fundamental for people's understanding of wood products. The second person to present is Christine Leduc. Christine works as Director of Public Affairs with EACOM Timber Corporation. I have met Christine twice. The first time was at this social event, which Ann also introduced me to. The second time was a conversation around mass timber. And I can tell you, no matter how long I've been in a business or how much experience I have, there are certain people that have a kind of really keen sense of the pulse of the kind of wood and lumber industry, and Christine is one of those people. So I might have some naive notion, and Christine will look at me and very patiently describe why that's not going to happen, or why it's not going to happen quickly, and I think that's a really amazing skill to have. Next, we will be hearing from Lars. Lars has a CV that when you read it, you just want to give up. You go like, that's a pretty amazing CV. Why am I even here? So basically, Swedish national living in Washington, D.C., forestry degree from the Swedish University of Agricultural Science, PhD in forest industry, 6 years as a research minister in SLU and European Commission, joined World Resources Institute, and it goes on and on and on. So a really eminent both scholar, practitioner, and we're really fortunate to have him here. And the last one is Grace Jeffers, who is basically an esteemed design historian who focuses exclusively on materials. When I read Grace's CV as a designer, I was totally attracted to this whole idea of materials, social use, and cultural use, and thinking about it in relation to design practice. So I think we're going to have a very interesting time today. So without further ado, Rob.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks very much. Yeah, it's a real pleasure to be here today. And I guess I want to bring it a little bit closer to home about some of the forestry practices that we have here in Canada, in fact, and certainly in Ontario. And I think we heard this morning a lot about sustainability, a lot about the world forests. And in fact, the numbers vary somewhat, but we here in the world, we have about 31% forest cover. And certainly I think it's well recognized how important those forests are to multiple cultures across the world. And certainly, how they're so intricate to the survival of multiple civilizations over millennium. So really, forests are playing such a critical role. And we heard a lot this morning, and mostly this morning, about sustainability. And I think it really is quite amazing that the world is starting to recognize how important it is to have sustainably managed forests. And I happened to be at a conference, a World Biosphere Conference a few years ago in Lima, and one of the delegates there talked about sustainable forestry and how it's going to be so important for our future. Certainly we've heard from the IPCC about sustainable forestry and addressing climate change. So this is on a world scale. And again, we've heard this morning about sustainability and the importance of it, but I think it's important for us to recognize what we're doing here in Canada, and certainly on the home turf as far as sustainable forestry goes. So certainly in Canada, how much forest do we have in Canada? 42% forest cover. It's 9% of the world forest. So, we see that Canada is a major player in our forestry sector. And what's so incredible is, and there's probably some various opinions on this, but Canada really does have the highest amount, in fact, 38% of its forests are certified. And so it really bodes well to how well we actually do manage forests here in Canada. And certainly when you think of certification, these are third-party certifications. It's not the forest industry that's doing this certification. It's third-party entities that are out there putting high standards in place that we're being measured against to talk to how well we manage our forests. So again, third-party certification. In Ontario is 66% forest cover, and in fact, Ontario has 2% of the world's forests, 9% of which are certified. So it really is quite incredible that here in Ontario, how well we're doing with pulling our weight with regards to managing forests. And it certainly has been recognized by those outside of Ontario how good our forest management practices are. And it's all good and well to talk about how good we are with our forest management practices. And I think when we start talking about using wood, we have a great story. We have a great story to tell about how well our forests are managed. And why they're managed, I think, is important just for folks to have an understanding. And certainly when we start talking about the management of our forests, there's a lot of science that goes into it. They've got regulations and legislation that have been developed from science. And so that's the driving force behind how we're managing our forests. And the premise behind it all is we are emulating natural disturbance patterns. So when we start talking about that and emulating these patterns, we want healthy forests back on the landscape. But we want to ensure that those forests, the same types of forests, are the ones that are coming back on the landscape. So when we're emulating and managing the forest, that's the goal, is to keep the diversity that's there, the high biodiversity that we have in our forests. And all of that is so important when we look at emulating those natural disturbance patterns. And then, of course, taking in people's views, what their values are. That is such a unique thing to hear in Ontario, is having that discussion with folks, finding out what their values are. What would they like to see on done to the forest, because after all, they are public forests, and then incorporating that into the forest management planning process. A forest management plan on Crown lands in Ontario takes about 2.5 years to do. Probably close to $1 million right now to put one of these things together. And there's multiple stages throughout that planning process that the public is invited out to come and look at how their forest is going to be managed. So it's very unique in Ontario to have that high amount of public input, but so critical to ensuring that you acquire that input into how we actually manage our forests. And of course, with all those values considered, and I was on 6 forest management plans, writing what's called area of concern prescriptions that speak to a value and then speak to how that value is actually going to be addressed in the forest management plan. And some of these plans have hundreds of AOCs within them that are addressing those types of values. So I think it's so important when we're thinking about our forests and here in Ontario and all these types of values that are being addressed with our forest management practices. And I actually had a slide of the places we were visiting yesterday, and just some of the wood products that we have. And I think this is where we start bringing it back to some of the architects and engineers that were talking about wood, and we were talking about sustainability, but I think it's so important for everybody to recognize how well we manage our forests here. The forestry community, the forestry sector, the users of wood, should be proud of how well we manage our forests here in Ontario. You should be able to go out and talk to other folks, when you're talking about, well, is it some of the other building materials or wood? Be proud to say, yeah, we've got the best managed forest here in Ontario, so be proud to use those wood products. The problem is, the challenge is that, certainly myself in the forestry community and others in the forestry sector understand that, but in general, I would suggest that the public doesn't have this kind of understanding. They aren't aware of how good our forestry practices are, and because of that, there can be challenges with, certainly with governments and how much funding is allocated by to governments to run certain things. We see in our ministry, here in Ontario, we've got a Ministry of Natural Resources, Ministry of Environment, they've got new names, so I'll just stick with the old ones, Ministry of Environment, and Ministry of Development and Mines. Those 3 ministries, basically taking care of our environment, have less than 1% of our provincial budget. That's it. And every year, there's requirements to reduce that budget even further. So these folks are taking direction, of course, from the politicians. Politicians are taking directions from the public. And again, it's back to talking to the public and saying how important it is to have these sustainably managed forests to our society, our economy, and certainly having those sustainably managed forests is good for the environment, for all the reasons I've currently specified. Where we have the opportunity now is unfortunately, with climate change, and being able to talk to folks about, and we've heard it many times here today, about how trees sequester carbon dioxide. And this isn't saying yes or no to climate change. This is a fact that trees do sequester carbon dioxide. In fact, 50% of a tree is made up of carbon. And so when you start using wood products, you are in fact helping to fight climate change. And so when you start looking at this model, and it's not just about protecting trees anymore, it's you grow the trees, you harvest, you make into wood product, and that wood product holds that carbon beyond the regular life cycle of the tree. So it's a pretty simple model where you just keep producing those wood products, and we're seeing the need from what you've heard today and opportunities for starting to expand how much more wood could potentially be used on the landscape. And we're seeing tall wood buildings, more architecture being developed, and beyond just sequestering carbon, the beauty of wood is you can't beat it. Everybody loves it. So we see that, and we see the opportunity. This is from Michael Green's slide, actually, about using wood. It's the only building material that's actually made by the sun. And nobody can dispute that. And it's a great building material to use. We've started a campaign called It Takes a Forest. And with this campaign, we're trying to bring information to the public about how well we manage our forests, about how important it is to use wood products that are sustainably managed. And so with folks like yourselves, when we can talk about and we're more than happy to talk to you more about this, but talk about how our forests are managed, all the values that we address with our forest management, how it's good for the environment to manage healthy forests, then we have a really solid message there that we feel is going to penetrate with the public and educate the public on how important it is to use and wave the flag and be proud of our sustainably managed forests. So when we look at this, we look at wildlife. When we manage our forests, we're considering the wildlife values. When you're supporting, through forest management, you're supporting a healthy environment through supporting wood products and using wood products that we've all talked about today. You are, in fact, supporting that healthy environment as well. So it's a great message to take away. And certainly with the It Takes a Forest campaign, we're looking for folks like yourselves, again, be proud, promote our sustainably managed product here in Ontario. Be able to get out there, and if you have any requests for information at all, come and see us. We're more than happy to make presentations, provide you with more information, or whatever you'd like would help in you being able to promote you using a wood product. Thanks very much.
Do I have to change this, or? Sorry, I can get started while. Oh, sorry. This one. Yeah. I could have done that. Thank you. So my name is Christine, and I'm happy to represent a Canadian producer here as part of this supply chain panel. So I'm going to start quickly and give you a map of our operations so you get a sense of our company. We are primarily a lumber company. We make stud and random length lumber, so mostly for framing in houses, the building blocks that would go into CLT. We also produce some engineered wood products, and we've got a remanufacturing plant, so if you slept on a Sealy bed frame, maybe it came from us. But our operations are in Ontario and Quebec, and this gives you a good sense of our footprint. About 50% of our sales are destined to the U.S. right now with a tariff, thanks to our dear friend, Mr. Trump. But otherwise, you'll notice that our facilities are located in a good geographic location to cater to the GTA market. So 50% of our Canadian sales, of that, 2/3 are really going to the Toronto market. So we're definitely encouraged by things like changes in the building code. And then the tour that we went on yesterday gives a lot of reason for hope with the projects that we've got here in Toronto. Our company has experienced tremendous growth in the last couple of years. We have restarted a sawmill, but otherwise this is pretty significant, really showing that the demand is there. We feel it, the world wants wood, and we're hoping that we're in a good position to supply that demand. Accordingly, our workforce has grown tremendously with this. In 2014, we had 820 employees, and then the last time that I checked this morning in our payroll, we were at 1,167. And this is important because I really want to talk to you about our company and the folks that are involved in transforming the trees into lumber, and also what's going on the forest side. So we're really encouraged by this growth and hope to continue this trend. I'm happy to build on some of the things that Rob had shared with you. This visual I took from the State of the Resources report. It's a Canadian report from 2017. One of the beauties of Canadian forests, and I'm glad that Sarah showed a map earlier of global forest cover, is that Canada is rich in forests, but Canada is also rich in crown lands. And so when we think about what crown land means, that means that it belongs to the people of Canada. In our federation, the resources are the dominion of the provinces, and so when we look at crown lands, really if we zoom into Ontario and Quebec, 90% of forests are crown lands, meaning that they belong to the people of Ontario or the people of Quebec. And the important thing about that is that the Crown manages or sets regulation in place so that the forests are managed in the interest of the people of that province. And so legislation ensures a couple of things, notably public reporting opportunity for consultation, and auditing and monitoring. So given that it is a Crown resource, I'm sure you're wondering, what's the return on investment? So if we look at it in terms of the return on investment for that small portion of forest being harvested, these are some of the stats. So it's quite a bit, it's quite an important job figure and dollar figure when we think about the Canadian economy. And then if you look on the right column, our piece on the social aspects, one of the ones that I want to point out to you is the seedlings that are planted every year. So every year as the industry harvests, more than 500 million trees are put in the ground to regenerate forests that are being harvested. And this number doesn't count all of the trees that are planted through various community initiatives or by initiatives of an organization like Forests Ontario. If we zoom into Ontario, we see a similar picture in terms of the forest area and then how much is taken each year by Mother Nature, natural disturbances like forest fires and insect outbreaks, and then the amount that is harvested on an annual basis. We had a pretty intense fire season in Ontario this year, and so I've got some interesting stats to give you in the context of the forest fires that we experienced this summer. I'm sure you all heard of Parry Sound. It was a really scary fire. By the time it was at 5,000 hectares, we were all panicking, and Parry Sound grew to 9,000 hectares, which was very scary because of the proximity of that forest fire to values such as properties, highways, cities, things like that. We had a fire in northeastern Ontario. It was called North Bay 72, and it grew to 27,000 hectares. But none of you heard about that in Toronto because we were all so stressed out about Parry Sound. That is a huge fire, 27,000 hectares, and it was very close to some of our communities, 30 to 10 kilometers away. And so we had a lot of our employees and a lot of our community members that were afraid of what that fire would do. When we put the size of a fire like that in comparison to our harvest operations, our Elk Lake facility, which was close to the North Bay forest fire, takes trees from the forest, and the area that caters to that mill on an annual basis is about 6,000 hectares. So the forests that are harvested and regenerated to feed our Elk Lake sawmill were even smaller than Parry Sound forest fire that we had this summer, and still much smaller than our North Bay fire. Just quickly, I've shown you a map of our operations. These are the forest management footprints to supply those operations. And then I thought we'd get a little creative, and we did a bit of a diagram to show you our flow process. If you look at the top left, you'll see the forestry planning. It's really one bubble that doesn't do it justice because, as Rob shared, forest management planning is a lengthy process. It's not the back of a napkin, here's my PDF, I wrote a plan. It's a complex plan that takes a long time to write. You have to look after the values, but also make sure you're consulting and taking in that feedback. And then I think the other thing I want you to take away from this process is that once the trees go to the mill, they're debarked, and then that bark can be used into hog fuel for the mill. The tree then gets processed, and our job is to take as much value out of the tree in terms of boards for our products. But otherwise, whether it's the sawdust, the shavings, and the wood chips, all of that is collected and sold into other processes. So one of our biggest customers is Domtar, which makes other kinds of products for the market out of forest products. So it's a really integrated sector, and we're really happy about that. There's no waste. Just to expand again, as part of our regenerating program, EACOM is directly responsible for putting 5 million trees in the ground, and then indirectly with our program, with our partners up to 16 million. Our job is not to plant trees, it's to regrow the forest. And so it's much bigger than a summer tree plant. You have to make sure that you're going back and monitoring, are the seedlings surviving up until the point that the Crown declares that you've regenerated the forest to the point that it goes back over to the Crown. And if something happens, such as a drought or a forest, any type of disturbance or impact that could affect your region, you're still responsible for the regeneration of that forest. I think I'm running out of time, so I'll just move quickly through some of my last slides. We are on the land base with many other forest users, and so we do build lots of access roads, but it's important that when we're managing the forest, we're sharing that forest with the other users of the forest, whether that's communities, people who work and play in Northern Ontario, as well as anglers, hunters, recreationalists, any other forest users we're engaged with. And just quickly, 80% of Canadians live in cities, and so sometimes we feel a disconnect between our the rural and northern Canadians with the urban Canadians, and so we're really trying to get creative as a company in connecting our operations, our people, our processes with the rest of Canada, so they have a sense of the job that we're doing. And so I thought I would share a photo of some of the folks who are involved writing the forest management plans and making sure that we're transforming the resource in a safe way and in an effective way. And so really, for those of you who are in the industry, in the construction industry, and you're choosing to build with wood, when you are picking a product that comes from a Canadian managed forest, you are choosing Canadian communities. So thank you for your efforts, and thank you for your choice of using wood. Thanks. All yours.
Which one is that?
Top one. Okay. Am I connected? Yes. Okay, good afternoon. I will try to make the case for strategy and collaboration in what I call the Great Forest in the North. And I will explain this further. But first of all, I want to make a scientific poll. Hand up if you know what CLT means. Hand up if you know what CTL means. Okay. So this shows a bit of the balance between the communities. CTL, of course, stands for cut to length logging, which would be one of the methods available. The other one would be tree length logging, perhaps. So in terms of collaboration, Canada was a pioneer in mechanization of forest harvesting. So about 50 years ago, my country, Sweden, was looking to develop machines, and Canada was ahead. So they imported these two pieces of equipment to a logging show in northern Sweden. It was the Hvitfeller buncher and it was the Beloit tree harvester. And they operated in Sweden. In the end, they were not good for Sweden, but they inspired lots of development. And I'll come back to that. But just as to say that collaboration has been successful. Now, in terms of forests, as I see it, there is this great opportunity here, which is called the bio-based society. And there are many aspects to this bio-based society. One of them is, of course, the theme of this conference here, which has to do with solid wood. You know, producing wood in the forest and bringing it to cities for various uses, including buildings. But there's a chemical side to this bio-based society as well. And the motto for these people is to say that anything you can make out of plastics, you can also make out of wood. And this is now a very active, cutting-edge research topic. They no longer have pulp mills, they have biorefineries. And so that means, as I understand it, looking forward, and with climate change coming, that there will be a great, strong demand on our forests. They will have to work for us. And the question is, will that relationship between forests and people hold? As a forester, I think that the forest can do its job, but will people allow it? So I see a few issues. I will mention a few issues here and then make some suggestions for how we can deal with them. And the first issue I see has something to do with scale. The scale relationship between people and forests is critical. Sometimes one would make the analogy with agriculture, but an agricultural crop, as a person, you cannot enter it. As an ant, you can enter it, but as a person, you cannot. It will reach your waist, and you can see across it, and it's an annual cycle, so you know that next year it comes back, and during the lifetime of a person, you have seen many annual cycles of agricultural crop. But when you come to a forest, I mean, you come into the forest, and often we talk about forests as cathedrals. You know, you understand why from this picture. And the lifespan of a forest is in fact not even the tree generation, because when trees burn, the forest goes into a different phase, and forest time is somewhere between people time and geological time. You know, a few centuries is nothing for a forest. And that means that it's difficult for people to relate to forest because, as one would say, man is everything's measure, or the human is everything's measure. It doesn't work very well with forests. And this is one issue that we have. Another issue is how we monitor the forest. And we have now gotten very good at monitor the loss of trees. Monitoring loss of trees is fairly easy because it usually happens quickly and it happens in a concentrated manner. So if you look in a satellite image, you see the trees are here today, but they're gone tomorrow. Terrible, deforestation. Okay. And this became an issue maybe in the 70s. We discovered this fishbone deforestation in the Amazon and so on. The government in the US certainly put lots of money into research facilities, universities, to learn how to monitor deforestation from space. And that has now been successful. Nobody asked that these universities make the same effort to monitoring trees coming back. This is more difficult because it's dispersed, it is slow, but anyway, as it is now, we have one side of the coin, but we don't have the other side of the coin. Now, the claim of sustainability from the forest sector rests on the fact that trees will come back. And as the forest sector, at the global level, we cannot really show it. It can be shown how trees are disappearing. It cannot be shown how trees are returning. And if you look at this representation for Canada, for example, this is what they call tree cover loss. It looks like that on the map. You have the bars here. One could easily get the impression that Canada is losing forest. This is not the case. But because we have this only one-sided of the coin representation, this is the sort of data that you will see, and this is the problem. And by the way, it seems to me that the forest industry was a little bit asleep behind the wheel when they did not lobby to have government funds going into research to show trees returning. They should have done that, but they didn't see the strategic issue. Another issue that we have is what I would call false generalization. And that goes both ways. It used to be in the past that the countries in the north said that our forestry model is super good. You developing countries, you just escaped colonization. Now you should build sawmills and you should have plantation forests and all that, just as we do in the north. And that was a case probably of flawed technology transfer. It didn't work that well in the countries in the tropics. What we see now is the revenge of the tropics. That you have the tropical ideas coming back at the boreal. You know, in the tropics, when trees disappear, as you can see in satellite images, it really often is, not always, but it often is deforestation. In the north, when trees disappear, it's most likely part of a sustainable logging cycle. But if you generalize from the tropics to the north, you will start to be very concerned about deforestation in Canada or in Scandinavia or whatever, and you're making a flawed generalization. That's not the case. So here is a typical map. If you look at this, this is from Global Forest Watch, from WRI, where I used to work. I used to work with this also. And you look at the color scheme here, and this is a mixture of tree cover loss and sort of tree cover gain, which is not a very good data layer. But if you look at this, you could easily get the impression that trees are disappearing in North America all over the place rapidly. And it's only like about 2 months ago that someone came up with this map, which is the first attempt to not just look at pixel by pixel when trees disappear, but actually look at the landscape and the probability of trees returning. And here you see a completely different color scheme, where the brown areas at the top of North America is fire, more or less. And then you have the green, which is some sort of sustainable forest management cycle. You know, trees are cut and trees are returning after some time. There is a little bit of how to say, domestic deforestation going on in terms of urbanization and cities expanding, and that is deforestation. But it's not connected with the forest industry. But this map is just out, and this is just the first attempt, with showing again that you know, the tree returning monitoring is lagging behind tree disappearing monitoring by a few decades. And this is critical if we want to build a biologically based future on the forest. We cannot do it based on false assumption about how the forest works. And then, of course, there is a thing with urban versus rural. People used to be rural, and they had an understanding of the forest as something that is producing, because they needed to produce. But when you move into the cities and you grow up in the cities, you tend to look at the forest more as a park. And there's a conflict between these perspectives. Is the forest a production facility, or is it a park? And of course, I would say that it is both. And it's critical that it is both, and that we can make it both. And this is the challenge for good forest management, is to make it into both. So the "and" here is very important, but it's not always there yet. We have to put it there if we want to come to this bio-based society. So I will make a few suggestions also. So one is, I think that these issues are common to what I call the great forest in the north. And if you look here, this is a map of the biomass in the world's forests. And it pretty much is cut in the middle. You have a northern forest, you know, North America down to the Gulf of Mexico. You have Europe north of the Mediterranean. You have Russia north of the Himalayas, and it goes down, includes Japan and the Koreas, more or less. And then you have a southern belt, which functions completely differently, not only ecologically, but also culturally. And to my mind, the great forest in the north is that northern area where we have many issues in common, and where I would like to see much more collaboration than we have now. It would be useful because we share strategic issues. And right now, I don't see that anyone is really trying to identify those shared issues, much less figuring out how to respond to them. The other thing that we need to deal is to collaborate across this rural-urban divide. And this workshop is, I think, one of the leading examples of trying to do exactly that. And the only thing that is wrong here is that there's too little of it. Scott, you need to scale up. But I don't think I need to say more about that. I have another pet peeve, and that is, in fact, the role of my own profession. And since I am a forester, I feel entitled to criticize it a little bit. Forestry is about long-term and big space. Forestry is about integration of all sorts of different aspects on that landscape. And it is all this, how to say, ecological aspect. There is soils, and there is trees, and there is water, and all these things. There is also the stakeholder perspectives, and this is fairly new. It used to be that as a forester, you could just go out in the forest and be with the trees, and you would know your scientific disciplines, and that was it. That doesn't work anymore. As a forester today, you need to be a diplomatist as much as you're an ecologist. And I don't know that to the forest faculties we recruit that sort of personality type necessarily that is good with diplomatics. And there's all sorts of issues there that the forestry profession has so much going for it. It has such a vital role. And I wish that the forest profession would do a better job of stepping up and assuming that role of the integrator in the landscape. So I conclude. We saw yesterday some pictures of the IT industry 50 years ago and the IT industry today. Here is sort of a result of that import of forestry equipment from Canada 50 years ago. This is a CTL machine. You see that it's cutting the trees to length in the forest. And it no longer has wheels even. It walks through the forest in order to preserve the forest cover. And this is not fully yet the production machine, but just to show you that what is coming. So as a symbol of the fruit of collaboration, I think we need more collaboration in the forest. Thank you.
I'm the Grace Jeffers one. Yeah, it'll go on. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. It's marvelous to be here and hear so many diverse voices. I wanted to say that I come to you today as a pilgrim, that I come to you from the art world and the design world, and I only venture out to understand things more deeply and to share the questions and the answers with my community. So when Scott asked me to come here today, I was like, what should I do in 10 minutes? And what I decided to do is give you a little nutshell of the kind of work that I share with the architecture and interior design community. I was an artist. I have a strange background. I went to art school. Then I went to the Bard Graduate Center, and I was trained by European royalty to be a museum curator for private royal collections. And then I decided to study plastics, and I became a pioneer in plastics conservation. This is a likely trajectory, right? And then after a bunch of watershed historic preservation projects, I decided to write an encyclopedia, which I don't recommend any of you do in case you never want to get married and have children. And in writing my encyclopedia, when it came to write the chapter on wood, I had one of those matrix moments when I took the pill and I realized that I couldn't begin to write about wood without understanding something of forestry. So then I wrote a 200-page introduction to my wood chapter on forestry. And so then I got tired of writing an encyclopedia all by myself. And I started realizing when you write entries that bigger patterns about materials emerge. And so I'm here to share some of that bigger pattern thinking that I encountered in being in the minutiae daily about materials. I love addressing the truisms about materials, those knee-jerk things people say all the time that they're like, mottos, they should be on T-shirts. Wood as a renewable resource is one of my favorite ones to address. So yes, wood is a renewable resource. And, yes, I also failed to move my slides forward. Is it not on? Click. Okay. So one of the big epiphanies I had is that wood is renewable, but forests are not. That humans and human activity is altering what forests are. And that we are regrowing trees globally, but we are permanently altering what the forests were and what the forests will be. And this is not a problem. Humans need wood. I have no problem with wood consumption. But I think as somebody with a museum background, connoisseurship is everything from that world. So apply that to the understanding of forests. So we're regrowing trees, but we're changing what forests are. And so when I work with interior designers and architects, I ask them to consider in this concept of renewability of wood, a concept of time and a concept of forests. Because a lot of people work in offices and they literally specify wood because of the grain. From where I stand in the communities I work with, wood is really just a pattern in a palette that goes on cabinetry. So I begin with the idea of, do you know the harvest age of trees? Do you know the lifespan of trees? I believe this is an important concept. And just as Michael Green had the figure of 100 minutes last night, which is a great figure, but I also think it's important to understand the total growth, the total number of growth years at a harvest. And also forest impact. One of the things I say in my community is that if you want to make your life easy, stick with domestic woods, right? You have readily available at your fingertips some of the timber from some of the most sustainably managed forests in the world. And people who, if you engage them, are willing to share with you the excellent work they're doing. Thank you. So it's important to understand forests, but I find actually the vocabulary is the beginning of the problem. This is something I like to call words the beginning of misunderstanding. And for any of you who've ever sent their spouse to the store to get something specific without a picture, you know what I'm talking about. So I want you to do something for a second. Close your eyes and picture your perfect forest. What does it look like? How dense is it? How tall is it? What species of trees grow there? What is the humidity? What does it sound like? Do any animals walk in front of you? What animal might it be? Or what birds might fly overhead or sing? Okay, now open your eyes. Did any of your forests look like this? None of these are from Canada. Now, these are all legally defined as forests. And I wrote a white paper, and I refer to the Lund study on forestry. There are almost 700 legal definitions of what a forest is. So one of the important things to understand is, what forests are you talking about? Because in my world, everything has been so oversimplified and abstracted that we all have this literally like cartoon picture of what a forest is. So, and one thing I also learned is that it's very, very, very important to listen to each other. Right, and listen to the totality of the supply chain, and to understand that everybody has a different point of view, that a botanist has a really different expectation of a forest versus a logger, or like a bird watcher and a snowmobiler. So to understand our diversity, so I literally go into architecture firms and I say things like, there are 3 basic forest types. This is what they look like. These are the species of timber and the animals that live there. So they start to get a picture of that a piece of wood is a part of a tree, and a part of a tree is part of a network of other trees, or a forest. In my work, I always study the history of language, which is super important. And I think these terms are very different, very important that we're clear on them. The history of the term woods literally implies extraction, right? This is very different from the concept of forest, which the origin of the word forest was the wild other, the non-civilized. Which was wild. Truly wild, and so wild that it was frightening. So that is the origin of the language, and then it's evolved into other meanings. So I think we should use the term woods instead of forests more frequently. And the one thing, I will put this out on the table since nobody mentioned it today, is extinction, right? Extinction of species and extinction of forests. Because my community has no idea that there are threatened and endangered species of forests, and species of trees, and protected forests. I worked on a benchmark survey of the architecture community in the United States. Out of a list, 99% of American architects could only identify one endangered wood species. That's how negligent of information the community is. So I always say with these 5 questions, you can change the world. So do me a favor and repeat after me. What wood is this? Where did it come from? What is happening to the forests where it comes from? What is the conservation status of this species? Is it threatened or endangered? Seriously, if Rem Koolhaas, somebody had told him this, he would have never done the Prada shop in Zebrawood the way he did, right? Is this wood legal or illegal timber? All right, these are the, I always tell my community, I don't tell you what to do, but I teach you to ask deeper questions, and those are the deeper questions. And I end with the Lakota phrase, mitakuye oyasin, all my relations. And people, we are all connected, each one of us to each other, and each one of us to the forests. And I also, it's important to me to mention an indigenous phrase in my presentation because I truly believe that understanding the indigenous point of view is critical to finding solutions we've yet to uncover. And just in 30 seconds, I'll explain that their language structure is completely different than the dominant world culture language structure. They don't use pronouns. So when in indigenous languages like Ojibwe or Menominee or Lakota, they don't say the lake it, the forest it. They treat these entities as entities that are alive and that can transform. A lake can become a river, can roll into the ocean, can become rain, can become something we drink, can become soup. It's mutable. Similarly, a forest is also alive. It can be fuel for fire or a shelter. So it is a dynamic system. And their language acknowledges this, and ours doesn't. So thank you. Thank you for having me.
One question that the whole group could tackle, but I will ask you, from each one of your perspectives, in terms of a connection, like I'll go back to the supply chain, basically from the forest to the city, what do you think are the greatest challenges right now in terms of the wood industry and the use of wood as it is developing now? I mean, we saw a really optimistic picture from Michael in terms of this massive wave of wood production. And there are other people, when I talk to other people like building sciences or everything, we talk about the siloing of this process so much in the context of our culture right now, that this transition is much more difficult than it seems. So what do you think? You I think
pass the mic, or
you, I just turned mine on.
Okay. I turned mine on.
Yeah, and I really think and actually I think it was discussed the rural and urban connection or lack of connection. And I think I was from Huntsville, which is 2.5 hours north of Toronto. And when I first started working in Toronto, I talked to a lot of folks downtown, and Huntsville has got a mills there, very much associated with the forest industry and such. So there's an understanding in the Huntsville population of the importance of forestry. I get down to Toronto and I talk to people about trees and forestry and what I did, and they just, oh, you're the guy out there with the chainsaw cutting down all the trees and raping and pillaging the lands. And you shouldn't be cutting trees at all. It's just like, oh my gosh, like really. And that wasn't just one or two people. There was a huge disconnect between the folks down in the urban city and what happens in the rural landscape. And I'm not that sure if that's typical with a lot of countries or such, but certainly when you look at a province like Ontario, and I had a picture there where it showed essentially the population of Ontario, the majority, 90%, is in southern Ontario and the rest is in northern Ontario. That disconnect plays a huge part into the policies that get developed. And the misinformation that is heard by people down that, the urban population plays into the policies that are developed. And that plays into oftentimes policies that will have a very negative impact to our rural communities. So I think that our rural communities are frustrated with this. They recognize that there's this southern Ontario populations that dictating how they live. And so I think there's the importance of bringing the groups together, getting a better understanding of what happens on the rural landscape, but also what happens on the urban landscape too, and with our forests in the urban centers, and bringing those two together and gaining that understanding. And I think with that, there's going to be just a better acceptance of how we manage our forests and how we can move sustainably managed forests forward in the future.
I'll echo what Rob said. I think public perception is a challenge, whether on the forest management side and people not having an understanding or an appreciation of the resource and how it's managed. But even yesterday on the tour, hearing how new some of these timber structures are, you've got some job convincing the guys that are coming in and installing the elevators, or the guys that are on the site that are not used to the products. I think too, people will fear wood, and why would I build with wood? It can burn. So we've got some work to do to promote these innovative wood products. Back to this north-south divide, we were watching on the news the North Bay 72 forest fires, and every time they would talk about Parry Sound, it was the largest burning fire in northern Ontario, and I kept thinking, oh, they're covering our fire, but it was Parry Sound was the northern Ontario fire, and we were in Elk Lake, North Bay, and it was not getting any coverage in Toronto. So whether it's the resource that we have, the wealth of forest that we have, the way that they're being managed, or even what we can do with those wood products and how good they are at answering some of our societal needs, I think we have some work to do on the perception piece, which in turn could impact the buy-in or the demand for wood products, whether it's in the construction industry or that appreciation in the forest where everything starts.
Okay, so I will not repeat what has been said already, but I could because it's important. I would say then, just to throw out something, inertia in the architectural and the construction industry and the architectural community, vested interest in that community. There are strong interest in competing materials that don't really want to see wood emerge. People are not used to working with wood. So that would be one factor that is difficult to overcome. This will take time. And the other thing that I would say is that from the forest side, I wish that there was a little bit more, acknowledgement that there are other dimensions than just production to it. And I think Forest Ontario represents that, but it's in size minuscule in relation to the challenges in this relationship. So I think that facilitating the relationship between urban and rural is something that deserves much more attention, and including financial attention, than it is currently getting.
First of all, my community is demanding transparency, right? So that is one of the big buzzwords in the industry. They're asking for LCAs, they're asking for BDPs in order to actually show third-party certified transparency of their practices. So that's super important. I also think there needs to be an immense amount of education. We're living in an increasingly polarized moment, and it's frankly terrifying. And so it's how do you begin to dissolve polarity? And you do that with education and mediation, right? That any platform where you can begin to dissolve the boundaries and share are super important.
I'm going to open it up to questions.
So you have that one right here.
Thank you. Hello, Lars. I'm Ann Coven, and I'm a forester also. And I was interested in your last point about the competency and motivation of the profession. And at the University of Toronto, we have a Master of Forest Conservation program. One of our grads is sitting to your left. And this year, I think, someone can correct me, but I think 70% of our students are female. It might even be more than 70%. And so I wondered how you would react to the suggestion, the statement that the forestry profession will be improved by having more young women enter the profession, bringing different points of view.
But I can only hope that what you're suggesting will be true, that it will be improved, but it seems likely that it would. I think I have this from a very prominent forester known as Kenton Miller. He's known internationally as the father of protected areas management. He was the president of IUCN at some point. And he was a forester, he had a PhD in forest economics from Syracuse, although nobody knew it. He was a proud forester. And he said exactly this: my profession is sorely needed, but it is not stepping up to the plate. With this baseball ball analogy, that someone is to integrate everything that comes from these ecologists and all these IST professions and bring it all to get integrated and balance it. And as he was saying, this is the future of the forestry profession, and it's absolutely not doing that. It requires all sorts of changes for that to happen, but it's necessary, I believe. And if women... as women are entering the profession, I can only hope that they are culturally more open to this than in the old forester type.
I guess this is a question for the two foresters. I like the distinction between the forest and the woods. And I thought the images that you used of kind of replanted forests were great. I was wondering, at this stage, what percentage of timber harvesting in Ontario is done from natural forests, and how much is done from replanted woods, I guess, if they were. And at what point do you see that we maybe get to a point where they would be sustainable 100%?
So sorry, it's from natural woods versus replanted
natural
forests?
forest from crown land versus replanted woods.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have that stat right off the top of my head, but suffice it to say that, as I mentioned in the presentation, when our forests are being regenerated, there's multiple techniques to doing it. One of the techniques is tree planting. The other is looking for natural seed sources and looking to the forest itself to regenerate itself after a harvest. Again, emulating those natural disturbance patterns. How would the forest naturally regenerate? So we're getting that kind of forest back again. And as Christina indicated, it's only when that forest is back and regenerated that it is then put back, call it back into the books as being available for harvest down the road. Like not just when it's 5 to 10 years old. But the calculation of how much land is available is only based on the amount of that kind of forest that has been regenerated and is successfully regenerated back to the type of forest that it was planned to come back to. And all to the point of trying to ensure that it's coming back and maintaining the biodiversity that exists right across the landscape. So there's no monocultures being planted per se. It's that natural forest, the mixture of species that was there before, and it's called a forest unit that's there, and we're trying to maintain all the different types of forests that exist across the province through that regeneration. So I don't know exactly, if you call it virgin forest that has never been touched before, I don't know what that percent might be.
I think
that's on
maybe
the
something
landscape.
that can be helpful is there's 71 million hectares of forest in Ontario, and of that 43 million are where you're legally allowed to do commercial forestry. So there's still those hectares of forest that would be off limits to forest management, whether you're in the north or in the south. And then within that, again, the forest is at one stage of regeneration, so it's either regenerating after a fire, regenerating after a harvest, and then eventually we're either harvesting it or another natural disturbance will come in. Mother Nature will do its job.
And is the amount harvested currently the same that's going on the books? Is it like a one-to-one relationship right now?
What do you mean one-to-one? Like one-to-one forest management with disturbances?
No, the forest that's coming back on the books, that's been successfully replanted, is that one-to-one with what's being harvested right now?
Of course.
Yeah.
So,
by law, you have to regenerate all forests harvested.
And just to be clear, it may not be regenerated within the year. It may take a couple of years to then be assessed as being significantly regenerated to then get back on the books. So it does take a little bit.
Usually it takes about 7 years before the Crown declares it free to grow, which means the liability transfers from the company back to the Crown. So in the case of these large forest fires, the Crown is responsible for regenerating those, but in the case of our harvesting, you're responsible for regenerating the forest after a harvest. And it's not enough to plant the trees. You have to go back and make sure that they're doing well, and if you have to go back and do some treatments afterwards to make sure that you're regenerating the forest, that's our responsibility. So.
Time for maybe 2 more quick questions. Ram?
Hi, it's more of a technical question, and I could be confused, but when you say one-to-one replacement, what do you mean? If you cut down a 100-year-old tree, you just have to, maple tree, you have to replace it with one baby tree? Because that's not the formula we use, but you keep saying one-to-one, so I'm a little confused.
It's generally based on an area basis. So if you harvest a hectare, you have to make sure that that hectare is appropriately regenerated before the hectare comes back on the books as being available for harvest.
I see, so it's by hectare.
And then the other thing, I think the Ontario stat is for each tree that's harvested, it's 3 trees that are put in the ground. But in the end, it comes back to the regeneration of the forest. So if you go back and the seedlings are coming back, and then it's a different situation than if you go back and they've not done well for whatever natural reason, and you still have to regenerate. So it maybe in that case, you're planting more trees per tree that you harvested, or maybe the 3-to-1 is successful. I don't think I said 1-to-1, but the Ontario stat is for each tree harvested, there's 3 replanted, but I'm not sure you could apply that to every single case.
And just to sort of end with a statement, so in New York City we have it's a wood-based replacement. So we have this basal area formula that you're replacing the wood. Let's say you're taking down a 60-year-old oak tree. You have to replace the wood that you have lost, which is fundamentally based upon the environmental services that the community is going to lose from, let's say, a 60-year-old oak tree. You have to make that up in wood. And there are calculations for it. So I just didn't understand the relation. But I'm obviously working in the city, but that's the way we do it. So thank you.
So can I just, this dialogue, if I can just comment to this, I have really learned that from understanding global forestry is insanely complex. And that so what they're talking about is different country to country, and then in our country, state to state, and then
city to city too.
And then you go nation to nation, continent to continent. It makes polymer chemistry look actually easy, right? So, and actually that's part of the art and the beauty of it, is that it is endlessly fascinating. I'm sure people who've been in it their lifetime are still learning. Oh, I didn't actually realize that practice that was exactly how that was done over there. So it is infinitely complex. But I will say one thing. The fact that we're in front of people who can answer these questions is, to me, one of the hallmarks of working with U.S. and Canadian wood suppliers, and that they will answer the questions, right? So, sorry to jump in, I wasn't even asked.
This is sort of primarily a question for Grace, but maybe be opened up to the rest of you. You mentioned transparency as a really primary aspect of sort of bridging the urban-rural divide along the supply chain. So I was wondering, what does transparency look like to you? You know, speaking to the architectural and design community, and then and then to the rest of the panel, you know, how does that look? Transparency sourcing from private lands versus public lands, because it seems like primarily most of you are working on Crown land. So that's pretty different in the U.S. as well. So if you could talk about that.
Well, in the U.S., we for building products, like you buy carpeting or laminate or wallpaper, and if you request the LCA, the life cycle analysis, or the BDP product declaration, they supply it. And they don't supply it for, it's not in the wood language, right? And it's not even in the thinking, right? That in a way, in terms of materiality, wood is sort of over there. So in the firms, it's treated separately, almost as its own material category, but the approach towards it is different. So another thing about transparency is that there's a great history of these relationships, suppliers cultivating relationships with the A&D community. You know, you go to EACOM, there are the big dinners. You go to Greenbuild, there are the big dinners. And so, or AIA, or, you know, ASID leadership, and so there is literally like a boots on the ground relationship between salespeople, company managers, and major players at A&D firms. And what I don't see is, you know, how come none of the speakers at NEAC, like the wood industry is not teaching CEUs of like a comparative materials study of wood products versus other products. You know, like there should be CEUs on these things. There should be CEUs on what good forest practices look like. And let me tell you, they shouldn't have a whole bunch of drawings on them either. They should have pictures, right? Like, we want to be educated, educate us. We need to know. I always tell people, like, most of the time they see forests from their car, right? It's like there should be a field guide to forestry from your automobile. Because that is how most of us in our community see forests. So that would help.
Can we pick up on that?
We did have one more question from the floor. Did you want to make a response, Lars?
Yes. Transparency is a means, it's not a goal. And transparency comes with the transaction cost. And if people don't trust the forest industry and they insist on all sorts of schemes to extract transparency, they're also adding to cost to the wood and they're adding friction to the flow of wood from the countryside into the cities. And adding a lot of friction will mean that people will prefer other materials than wood. So I would say that it's very important, if you demand transparency, to be efficient about that. And unfortunately, the certification schemes we have, they are several decades old, and they sort of embody in their very design old-fashioned notions that makes it difficult for them to use new technology, new data stream from space, pictures. If you read the certification standards, basically 150 fine-printed pages of legalese that you need to have gone to college in order to even understand. There is something big need to make a revolution in this transparency industry, because it's very dated.
Scott, if I could just add, in particular to the forest management planning side of things and the operations that happen on Crown lands. And as I mentioned during my presentation, during the forest management planning process, it takes about 2.5 years. There's 5 opportunities for the public to have a look at what's being planned, where it's being planned, what kind of harvest is being planned, what the future outcomes are planned to be during that type of forest management activity. So there's that. So the public has huge opportunities to get involved and look at what's being proposed for the lands. There are independent forest audits that are done every 5 years. Those are become public information. There's audits through FSC or SFI or CSA that are also being done on Crown lands, all to the point of ensuring sustainability. Then there's annual work schedules that are available for public viewing. A lot of this stuff is actually available on the internet now, so it's quite a bit easier to go in and see what is it that's being planned. And then during the forest management planning process, there's a report of past forest operations, so people can go in and see what was done on the land. So I would suggest that the transparency, in particular on the Crown lands, is through the roof. And you know, nobody's trying to hide anything from anybody with what happens on the forest lands, because, as Christine said earlier, these are public lands. These are your land. These are your forests.
Add to that, it really is predominantly Crown land. Maybe for us it's 1% that comes from private land. And if you go on our website, you can see the forest management plans for the Spanish and the Pine lands. Those are the forests that we have management responsibilities on. But you can also go on the MNR website and see all of the forest management plans for Ontario. Our annual work schedules are public. The results of our independent forest audits are also made public. But I think it's just a question of which Canadian proactively goes online. And these are big documents that are not exciting YouTube videos to watch. And so I think it's the question of, again, like, how do we make that connection? And it's available in various formats. You can go on our website or the MNRF website, but how do we make it more achievable for people? And then even with that 1% fiber that comes from private land, and generally people may say, well, it's not enough for me that the government or the industry says that this is right, which is why we seek certification. And in EACOM's case, we're certified to multiple standards, FSC, SFI, and as well ISO. And so again, you could go onto our website and get more information about that, but even if we're sourcing wood from private land or from forests that are not being managed directly through us, our certification schemes ensures that those certification schemes verify that our processes to obtain that fiber guarantees that it's not coming from an unsustainable source.
My people need pretty pictures and accessible language.
They
like really don't know what to do with big documents.
They need like a 30-second Hollywood trailer.
Graphs, forget it. It's like talking to a house cat, like deer in the headlights.
It's time for our coffee break. So I want to thank this panel. This is amazing, and this conversation keep going. Well, Rob Wright is on the stage. I want to give him a special thanks as well. Rob has been working behind the scenes and getting this conference together for a long time, along with lots of others. So while you're having your coffee break, and before you come into the next panel, please take time to visit the architectural model that has been built by folks from MJMA Architects, Patco Architects. John Patco, our keynote tonight, is going to be presenting the Goldring Center Tower. And there is a framing model that has been created by a group of young architects and students from the university. You need to check it out during this coffee break. And the coffee is outside this time. So make your way out into the lobby and get some coffee. One of our signs of success at Wood at Work is that it's hard to get people to stop their conversations and take their seats. So it's a good sign. But if everyone can start sitting down, we're going to get started with our final panel and one more round of lightning talks. And then there'll be a break before the keynote by John Patco. So everyone grab a seat. So this panel, just in brief while everyone's sitting down, is in a way the culmination of the other panels, because we're in a School of Architecture, Landscape and Design. This is the Wood Buildings panel, and I won't say much more about it than that, but I think there's a lot of excitement to hear about the reality of making buildings out of wood and thinking about sustainability in that process. So without further ado, Shane Williamson from the school, the John H. Daniels Faculty of Architecture, Landscape and Design.
Hello, everyone. So is my mic on? Is that perfect? Fine. I want to ask again. Hello, my name is Shane Williamson. I'm director of the Master of Architecture program here at Daniels. Welcome to our new building. It's a fantastic opportunity for us to have events like this, and they're still very new for us as we're kind of growing into our new space. So today's panel, we're looking at wood in the city. And it's clear that the momentum associated with building in wood in the urban environment is undeniable. By 2050, the world's population will total nearly 10 billion, with 2/3 of that population living in cities, compared to nearly half of us living in cities just 4 years ago. Inherently, the problem is that cities already account for 75% of global pollution and consumption of non-renewable resources, making it clear that cities will have to grow and that this growth should be carefully considered respective of environmental stewardship. The role of wood, respective of its potential to drastically lessen the carbon footprint of our cities, is driving the discussions that we're having today and the built-in environments of our future. In this context, it may seem extraordinary to be proposing a material that was itself rejected in the modern age, precisely because of fear and prejudice. Disasters such as the 1871 Great Fire of Chicago changed the perception of wood overnight and paved the way for the rise of industrial materials and the first skyscrapers. Shortly thereafter, Barmon and Wright, for example, were looking at exploring through load-bearing constructions in the Monadnock building. At the time, I believe this was 14 stories. I should probably know that more. But it's a fairly extraordinary example of the tectonics and the form that resulted from the load-bearing characteristics of brick. Later in the early 1900s, we see Mies van der Rohe with glass skyscrapers and the promise of transparency, the idea of the skeleton of the building. And while we've become very accustomed to tall buildings and glass and steel, it is still a very disconcerting image to see wood at height within the city. Of course, in Hong Kong, scaffolding like this is not dissimilar, is not unusual. But while the reading of wood in the city continues to test our perceived concerns of wood's capacity as structural sound and viable respective of fire safety, we are seeing a number of wood products that are being positioned as being as strong as steel, yet considerably lighter than steel, a kind of wood that can be used in cars, airplanes, buildings, and applications where steel would normally be used. This, of course, reminded me of the work of, I should note that this is also being positioned about using wood in the aerospace industry, which, of course, has its own history, and reminded me of the experiments that Charles and Ray Eames were conducting in the 1940s with their molded plywood shells. And at the time, for example, this study for a glider nose was one of the largest examples of a single shell structure of its type. Now, along with the material science associated with wood, we're seeing an increasing kind of amount of studies around wood's capacity for auto-extinction, of putting out fire in its own right. And it's a curious thing, this image is like if you Google auto-extinct, one gets this picture. But the point being that wood's capacity has been in doubt about its ability to provide us with fire safety. And as I believe probably most everyone in this room is beginning to understand or knows already, is that studies are beginning to show that that certainly is not the case. Although the context of this symposium is explicitly about wood, I certainly feel that the promise of future building science lies in hybridity, a hybridity of material science and building systems within our built environment, and one that I would imagine where wood would play a primary role. Having said that, our session today is going to focus on the design and research and context of what is happening in our contemporary state of building in Toronto and elsewhere. And we have a series of 4 speakers, 3 of which are here in person, and the 4th of which will be joining us via Skype. Dominique Briand. Sitting in the middle is the CEO of Structure Fusion. Donald Chong is a design principal of HDR Architects. Jan Schotte is a project lead at Quadrangle Architects. And Merritt Bucholz, who is sitting in the lap here in the chair next to me, is a partner with Karen McAvoy at Bucholz McAvoy Architects. Our first speaker will be Dominique Briand. Are you able to navigate?
Is it working? Yeah. All right. What a bad resolution, I'm sorry. So that's a big screen. I'm going to try to fit an hour of talk in 15 minutes. So I won't talk much about fusion, but I figure I'm going to talk about more, that's a clicker. I'm going to talk more about my impression of where our industry is at right now and what are the challenges for the future. So our industry being mass timber buildings, you know, CLT, glulam, whatever laminated timber. Just hoping it works. Yes, it works. So 2007, I was starting, that's when my first meeting with wood happened. I'm an automation engineer. I have no training in construction. I'm a bit of an imposter, actually. So 2007, I started a log building company, and I was really into wood. I mean, that's great. You take tree, you make a house out of it, but then you realize that it's not a perfect product. So, but what happened is, like next year, we're building this building here in Toronto with BNC Architect. What happened in only like 10 years, we went from this to this. 10 years ago, I would never have dreamed of being able to do a building like this. So it strikes me how the pace of the acceleration of the penetration of wood in the market is just crazy right now. I compare this to the cell phone. 2007 is also the year where the iPhone arrived. So since then, you can't argue with anybody because everybody has Wikipedia in the pockets. And now we have all the big industries have been changed by technology, taxi, hotels. Now Katera is trying to change our industry too. We'll see what happens with it. But we're really in the era of acceleration, and I would say that mass timber is definitely in that era. These are some of the big projects that were built in the last 10 years. So you see when we start 2008, there's a few, and the more we go, the more there are. 2013 has a page, 2014 one page too, 15 one page, 16, 17, 2 page for 17. They're not all built though, a lot are proposed, but still, I mean, let's go back because it's really, for me, you really see how much more projects they are and how more higher they go, or more complex they are. Okay, and if you look deeper at the way it's done. So this is the Laestadius building, for example, in Toronto. They use a system of panels. Somebody earlier was talking about CLT, which means cross-laminated timber. Some say it also means cuts a lot of trees. But so in this project, it's basically a big, massive wood panel. In this project, they decided to go with floors, walls, ceilings, everything. It's covered, but all the structure is mass timber panels. They did one, okay, it was subsidized, it was good at the time that they did a project like that, but economically, it's not necessarily repeatable, okay. Another project in Quebec City, post and beam with glulam deck. This project went fast, but there was no concrete on the floor, so maybe vibration and acoustics are a problem. So again, it's not a system that was really repeated. It's a little bit old school system. Cree, anybody heard about Cree? So these guys are fabricating prefab concrete slab with the wood. So they act as composite, and they ship it on the job site. So I think it's like 6 or 7 years old, that company. Now they have 3 buildings done, or maybe a 4th one, I'm not sure. But again, The market did not buy it yet. Okay, this system is not like widely represented on the market. That's the treat in Norway. That's an amazing one, actually. It's 14-story. The whole concept is to use modular construction. So, like you put boxes on top of each other. The problem with modular construction like this is you cannot go that high because of the loads. If you want to carry the loads with a box, the walls will be super thick. So they basically created a superstructure with 2 platforms. So they're putting up a 5-story modular building, a platform, another 5-story, and another 4-story. So they're stacking 3 buildings on top of each other to reach the height. So again, that's the only time that this way to build was used. That's the Brock Commons in Vancouver. It's 18-story. I really like this building. It's they used concrete shaft for the laterals. What I like about this building is that they really thought about the use of wood, and they decided to remove all the beams, okay? Because CLT can span in 2 directions. I can answer if you have questions after about that, but it can span in 2 directions, and so they decided to use the 2-way span of CLT and to put a column at the corner of each panel. Now, the grid is, I think, 10 by 14 or something like that. So it's a forest of beams. It's student housing, so it's not, nobody cares about student. No, but it's student housing, so it's really, the grid was allowed such a tight grid, but I would say that's the only downside. But much easier to run the mechanics. And the cost was much lower also. They're not matching the concrete cost, but they're between 5 and probably 8% above, which are, those numbers are really hard to check afterwards. But anyway, so great project, but again, it's not performing. Okay, so back there, it's not performing. What I want to show you there is that for all these projects are not yet performing equal to concrete or steel. We have not matched like a project that would say we'll match the cost, we'll match the acoustic performance, we'll match the spans, we'll match. In the market, we're not there yet. But what's cool, what's good is that as you see, no project and no system has been used twice. It's really hard to find a client that did 2 buildings with mass timber, and it's really hard to find 2 buildings that were done with the same system. So we're really still in the one-off era, and we're still at the bottom of the learning curve. So we learn much faster than steel and concrete, for example, who are using the same techniques like since years and years and years. So that's one of the first things. So our market is evolving fast. We're making the gap, you know, we're... in French, we say rattraper, so we're getting closer to the other materials performance-wise, and we still have potential to learn, so that's great. Now, what's happening also is that new stuff, new things are coming out. So in the last 5 or 6 years, we've seen much more composite system, where adding concrete to a floor slab, you can remove a little bit wood because you make them act together, like concrete and compression, wood and tension. One thing you need to understand also is one of the weaknesses of wood is its weight. The fact that it's light, as soon as you span more than 20 feet, you become, your system is governed by vibration. It becomes a trampoline. So it will hold the load, but if you jump like that, you will jump and you will have fun, okay? So really adding concrete. Right now, we all try to get rid of the wet trades on the job site, but it's really hard to get rid of concrete without adding a lot of wood, like way too much wood. So new things that are happening, glued-in rods. So instead of using like bolt connectors, that's a really bad connector, by the way. It should be a knife plate, but now the companies are starting to drill up to 1 meter in the wood with a maximum 1 millimeter deflection. So it allows, instead of having all the concentration of the forces around the bolt, it's along 1 meter, and plus there's no play, there's no loose. Okay, so if you pull that here, for sure one of the bolt will engage first because they're loose. So there's no loose, it's super tight. It allows you to make a moment connection. So you can make a connection like that, and it will not be a weakness to the beam. It's going to perform 100% the capacity of the beam itself. So you can, like, with 20 footers, make endless length of beams on the job site. You can conceal them for fire, for weather, protection for rain. What's my time about? Okay, I'm speeding up. So that's what it's looking in the real life. So these are connectors, male, female threads. Box beam, it's something common in Europe. It's going to come here for sure in the next 4 or 5 years. We're going to see it for longer span. Actually, what's cool with box beam is that you can put bricks or rocks or sands in the middle. You add weight, so you diminish the vibration like that. Wood that doesn't burn, there's a lot of companies right now that are trying to find treatment that won't affect the properties of wood but make it not burn. New products coming out, such as that's a mass plywood panel. So instead of CLT, they just use a veneer and make big panels out of it. New techniques, post-tension in the beam. So basically a big wire with spring-loaded, and it's like if you have an earthquake or something like that, it's going to move. The wire will take the tension. It will come back, and the building, we call that resilient building because the building won't be broken. Like the connection will be intact. It's coming. There's already 1 or 2 projects in North America. Okay, now, the next big challenge for the industry is to organize itself. Our industry is totally disorganized. Now, the way it works, sawmills they were doing lumbers, and they started to produce glulam and CLT and whatever. And then they realized that nobody would buy their glulam because nobody knows the trade, how to do it. I mean, an engineer in Quebec or in Ontario, they don't learn wood in university. They learn concrete, they learn steel. Carpenters, in Quebec, sorry, Mike, in Quebec, carpenters don't learn how to use chisel. It's just saw and nails. So what happened is that the industry organized itself in a way that the single supplier will supply from the sawmill all the way to the final structure. And one philosophical problem of that is having a sawmill and doing lumber, it's really doing product. It's product oriented. It's about commodity. I mean, putting glue between boards is a totally different job than sitting in a meeting with architects, engineers, managing job site unions, managing security, and being able to design and do a structure. So right now, the market in North America is 99% organized that the companies are doing both sides. So at the same time, they're volume-driven on this side and they're quality-driven here, so the results are not always good. And for the architects wanting to work with wood, it's tough. Analogy, the forest. Okay, hey, it's slow. So the forest, imagine the forest is the wet farm, wheat farm. Then the sawmill is a mill that makes flour. WLT, like whatever laminated timber process, CLT, glulam, whatever, it's like a pasta company. And the structure prefabrication is like a restaurant, let's say, okay? Then you have your meal, and you have your house on the other side, or your structure. So would you go to a restaurant that's owned by a farm and a mill that only cooks pasta, and you go there and you say to the chief, what can you cook for me? And then he answers you, whatever, sir, as long as it's spaghetti with tomato sauce. Well, that's the problem in construction right now. So, oh man, what have I done? Okay. So you need other ingredients to make structure that makes sense. A full wood structure does rarely make sense. A full steel structure rarely makes sense. Same thing for your kitchen. I mean, as architects, how many architects in the room? So you need to ask more ingredients in your design, but you'll have hard time. For example, this is an example of the typical project. So you see for a span of about 20 feet, you need to beef the beam under up to like 20-something inches. Then you have your concrete topping, and then since it's an office building, for example, you don't know where your tenants are going to be. You don't know yet your mechanic where you're going to run it, so most of the time you end up having like a raised floor, which is another 16 inches. You end up having like a composition of floor that's above 3 foot per floor, so you lose 1 story every 4 floors. If you mix your materials, you just add a steel beam in the process and a little bit of concrete composite system. You can span 30 by 30 and have no beams under. So 12 inch per floor, and this system is cheaper than this one. So asking different ingredient is important. You can order wood from everywhere. There's so many different types of wood, NLT, DLT, whatever LT. Mix them. Okay, I'm going to pretty much finish with that, and then pictures. Well, take me out of that stage. Try. Okay. So right now, the industry being super organized all together, that's a graphic I came to, I think, too much sometime. But the industry adaptability is limited by how much integrated and how much automated. That's what yesterday when they were talking that Ketera wants to buy the whole line, even the toilet production, I'm like, they're going to be so unflexible after. But anyway, I guess I'm going to learn something in a few years. But right now, the system complexity goes like that. And we're at a point where the industry won't be able to follow what's coming. And that's one of the challenges of the industry, of my industry. So here are a few projects. That's a bank, wood concrete composite. That's the first elevator shaft I did a few years ago with CLT. Realized it's not necessarily that magic. Going above 5 stories is not necessarily the best idea because it's hard on connectors. Church. Every time I build a church, I feel like I'm saved. I'm going closer to the sky. So these are airport buildings we're building in Toronto. In Boston area, we've done three of these buildings. Swimming pool. One of the other thing about mixing materials is also, for example, in residential building, a lot of people want to do mass timber residential. Right now, residential building, it's the market in mass timber that performs the less well or the worst, because acoustic, because expensive, because mechanics, because a lot of things. So when we have condo people coming to see us, we often say, instead of trying to mix material within your building, mix where you're going to put them. So put your common areas, you can put mass timber and do a standard building. So in that case, for example, for above 200 units, they did just the swimming pool. I think the structure cost them 125 grand, and they use it for the publicity, but the whole project seems like better. Office, refurbishing of old building. That's the Quebec Armory building that we rebuilt, 93-foot truss, 17 feet high trusses. That's the back part. Project in Connecticut. That's 114 feet long. A mix of steel, like these are steel, these are wood, a mix of steel and wood, and there's a carousel that runs under that, so it's a skylight about 40 foot across. With Gray Organsky architect. Quebec City Airport, dentist, architect office, different species. They went with, in French we say mélèze, I don't know what's in English later. Different project, that's one. I can't talk much about that. It's in Toronto, but you can ask Jonathan who sits there. He's allowed to talk more about me than this to me. Another project in the U.S. with Shop and VRC in Syracuse, New York. We're doing next year, 2019. And then I guess I'm pretty much done. That's a European project for which we did drawings, but we didn't fabricate. But we did the conception. That's a Buddhist temple we did. So every time I go there, I'm like, beam me up, Scotty, and it never works. That's it. So that's where the industry stands right now, to my point of view. Thanks.
Can everyone hear me okay? Oh, let me just turn this on. All right, is that okay? People can hear okay? Just want to say special thanks to Scott Francisco and the extended team and the Daniel School of Architecture for organizing an event like this. And I wasn't actually going to say this, but I thought it just occurred to me that I'm, just for people who don't already know, I'm a graduate of the University of Toronto. I see people here like Bridget Shin, who had taught me. I've taught with her. Shane Williamson, who had a great partnership with him, and Betsy Williamson for 5 years for Williamson Chong. Scott, of course, we went to school together. Even Dominique Briand, I know we met and had conversations as well. And there's many of you. Lloyd Alter, I see here in the room as well. I think that's maybe right to acknowledge that, because there's something about the embodied level of relationships and ideas that we kind of build together. And maybe it's a good way to kind of start this conversation on wood here. Okay. I like calling this talk. It's a talk that's been maybe building for many years now. I like calling it the crafted system. Increments, little projects, smaller ones, maybe not the big ones today I'll show, or instruments, ways of seeing architecture again, and kind of a renewed idea of stories, or a kind of an origin sense, a narrative for what wood might be in what we're doing. So what I usually often do is I kind of step back a little bit. I often have conversations not dissimilar to this about where are we. You know, I'm in the Canadian or non-Canadian context, just to situate us, even to see the kind of relative sense of the biomes and different kind of areas where different species tend to grow in North America. And so I do this, but then you start to think, and we know this image from Inconvenient Truth, or just from 1969, where I think Al Gore brought it back into its kind of main sort of back into our psyche again, about just seeing this kind of fragile thing. We know this story, right, of the Earth, and I just love the whole Apollo missions. I think I love our Earth too, but as an architect, it's interesting to kind of step back, quite literally, like this. And I'm forever the optimist, almost to a fault, some people would say. And then of course this comes out, and I kind of got freaked out. And this is about not even a month ago. And it seems like a real bad Michael Bay movie, right? Just there's going to be this kind of looming threat, and I've never seen it so definitive. And you start to wonder, okay, so what the hell what am I doing? I'm an architect. Am I actually doing anything meaningful or important, or are any of us in any discipline? And I love this. They're called trees, stupid. Really, right? That we had this amazing idea of how to, we know about sequestration, we know about the balance of what that means with emissions, and as an architect, I'll just come right out and say it's not an early narrative I learned to grow. I'm kind of learning it backwards. I'm okay to say that, because I'd seen traces in my own work and work that I'd done with other people here in the room to see and follow the patterns of what I've been actually doing. And might it mean something? Can I see patterns and things that we can do? And there's a moment where I almost think I'm on the cusp. I'll say this at least for myself, maybe others, where I love this diagram. Copernicus in the 1500s kind of just says to people, hey, heads up. It's not that we're having everything around, surrounding and circling us. It's not a geocentric idea of the world, of the universe, but a heliocentric idea. And it totally is it just flips the script. And people just wake up the next morning, they're still kind of doing their thing, but it's just different. Should we be seeing this again? And I think every generation thinks they're kind of on the edge or cusp of something. I got to believe that we kind of really are. And as architects kind of ostensibly interested in design, doing these things, can we start to step back? I know I certainly like to do that. And in this conversation, it's good to see this. So back to the kind of Canadian context, and of course, culturally, yes, some people have seen this. I'm a goalie. I show this because among the very material things when you're standing on one side of the ice, you got a lot of time to spend to think about things, including the material of the ice, the roof, the structure, actually, the things you hold, the leather, and of course, the wood hockey stick. And, it's interesting. You can actually feel the grain. And what we don't know or we don't realize how human a material like wood is. And I think just to hold that grain, and I play baseball as well, and the one thing people don't already know, you're supposed to put the label side up when you go for the swing, so that, and I knew this as like a 15-year-old, because the grains are actually going to be best aligned. It's every baseball bat company does this, best aligned for the best resistance, for the best launch of that leather ball. And so you have an early appreciation for wood. And in this world in which this is my grandfather's Japanese, I'm South Korean, but descent, they were influenced, the Asians, with the idea of ripping the grain by pulling. So you get the best tensile advantage of steel. We do it differently in the Western world. But you start to kind of think about it again. I think about this image a lot more. I know with Shane, Betsy, and I, we actually got the Canada Council for the Arts Rome Prize, and one of the studies we had done was wood. One of the images we had shown here, I look at it differently again, because we start to understand what's really going on in the grain there. And I think of people like Dan Barber. I don't know if anyone's seen his TED Talks. Thomas Keller. These are chefs. They go right to the source of where things happen. Maybe architects should too. And maybe it's high time we start thinking this way. And what's going on in there? Is this where we're getting, as they say, this kind of freebie of, someone once said, this medium, this storage, this idea to place all this excess CO2 that's out there? I never really thought of it that way. I look at these again differently. I just enjoy this for the efficiencies and the cultural idea of different cut plans. But when you think about these, every time I see that now, it's an opportunity. And where do we start to do these things? So the conversations in the previous set of how do you do forestry management, eco-forestry, how do you make sure you harvest at the right time so that the buildup of the sequestration and the time that you let it grow, do you do it in 45 years or 90 years? These are conversations that are part of our story now. And then these images about waste and things that were tossed away, where you get great sort of grain conditions for something that we'd seen actually in Roskilde in Denmark. People understanding, really getting close to how to make Viking ships and understanding how to build them again, looking at the way these hulls are made. And so tools, how we have that agency to then understand what's going on. And I think just running through these types of furniture that we all know, Wagner chairs, we got the Alto splines, and I started to realize how much we already knew. You look back at Canada, the way it's been built. We know this narrative, Last Spike, Pierre Burton, and even before that, the Haida Nation, many, well, this is about 100 years or about 50 years earlier, but thousands and thousands of years earlier. So what's our story of Canada? I like showing this image because we start to see our country, if anyone remembers this, right? It's like beachcombers. You see this idea of wood. It's kind of our identity. And the notion of this mythology of even the Tom Thompson, Group of Seven, trying to understand where we're placing this. So when one studies these things, you start to understand, as I had done while in Italy, what are we trying to do in the common sense? I had looked at buildings while I was in Florence, but what you could do when you have certain space that you could share. The kind of buy-in for a larger idea of what you're doing singularly, maybe. And even material notions in Florence of what you saw in this case, an unfinished work by Michelangelo, something that was already in there, the material sense. So the studies that kind of led to other kinds of things of teaching. I'll just speed through this, where I got a chance to teach in Switzerland with Bridget Schim some years ago. And the structural ethos is so strong there. The idea of wood is so easy to move and to travel and to work with treacherous sort of terrain. In fact, I'd argue, though, that concrete, reinforced concrete that Robert Maillard did in 1927 is actually because of the woodwork, the false work, and the tradition of the wood actually being the real support for what's going on with regard to the concrete. So stepping back, and I know Shane touched on this a little bit too, is you see Auguste Perret, Le Corbusier comes out with a system, and if you squint, it feels like where we're at right now with CLT systems, right? This was a big deal back then in like early 1900s, and with Auguste Perret, and a little later with Le Corbusier, to talk about what I would say is the project of the 20th century, the dematerialization of the load-bearing wall and the lighter skin. Shane alluded to that with the Monadnock building in Chicago. So are we starting to see what we do with materials, with structure, with culture differently? Sendai with Toyo Ito and the decentralized core that actually offers circulation, structure, daylight. And so how do we start to see these things in a world where people might think of this as a decorative idea for Sullivan, but you start to see the notion of wood. And wood, which we see with Michael Green's work, starts to show ideas of what we can do. And I think it's in this kind of light that some work that we've done, I start to look at wood. I see things. I'm not going to try to say retroactively, did wood become a major idea, or was it just part of what we did as a hybrid, even as Dominique said? And then other projects within the ravine systems in Toronto, just kind of going through some projects which had a certain efficiency, a certain kind of idea to buy into urbanism. And so looking back at projects that try to talk about a greater good, a common base, a shared embodied idea. And the quick version of this thing, small fridges make good cities, was an idea I had when I was saying, living in Switzerland with a tiny little refrigerator, that you can actually make choices in your interiors while actually making an impact beyond. And is that a lesson? Is that something that we could try to learn from, or that I certainly do in the bigger systems of things? And so these are just some of those images there. And they were quite modular, actually. And this was a lesson in wood and how to try to create spaces that actually would last longer and actually be something like an instrument or a tool for a certain kind of way of living. There's research into urbanism that led to a kind of density, a density in cities that would lead to other projects, narrow projects, infill projects. So as I was doing these projects here, the Galley House, you start to see what are the lessons that we can have with regard to the idea of architecture and the city. Yeah, I'm just going to close over on this one here. And I think when you start to see the idea of a detail in the larger system, you can start to see what we could impact with regard to the things beyond us. And I think there's a series of other projects that I'll show in a different time as well that would let us see the kind of impact of when we start to see our choices we make in systems with regard to projects like this one on a laneway for new employment lands and uses for a coffee roaster. And I think it's in this kind of light that you can start to see choices that we make that might impact the greater sort of systems in which we operate. And I think there's a series of other projects that I think would be easy to show later in terms of generational choices. I think it lets us think that what we do as architects, there's actually a material sensibility with a kind of larger idea. And this one here was, to close, part of a series of generational projects that would let us try to use the best parts of Toronto's fabric. And this meant that we could have millwork that could actually start to stage different uses of family life as it grows. And I'm going to just close on this one here. Sorry, Scott. This one was Grange Huron, a project in which we started to understand the influences that we can have. And I think the idea of a typology for a project can actually start to be something that we can map out. And one of the things I tried to map out here was to try to see the generational influence, that we're not only working in one area, but we're starting to see the bigger ideas of what it takes to do choices in materials and space, and also family life and growth, and something that could actually change the city too. Thank you.
Hello. This is my first time using a lapel microphone, so excuse me any awkwardness. I'm here today, my name is Jan Schotte. I'm the project lead for a project called 80 Atlantic, which is a new office building, wood office building in Liberty Village. And we've got the title here of 60 and 80, and I'm using that as an analogy for some of the ideas I'm going to be talking about in the presentation. 60 Atlantic was the first phase, And that was an office, that was a, I'm going to try and stop this here, sorry. So Liberty Village is an area in Toronto which historically had a lot of factory buildings and a lot of warehouses. And like most of North America, that type of building in the 20th century, early 21st century, was built using wood, heavy timber, and columns and beams, and something called nail laminated timber, which is sorry, I'm going to try to get this to stop. You get a context here of the area. Nail laminated timber floors with a brick skin. So 60 Atlantic is the building here on the bottom, which is an L-shaped building, and that was the first generation of brick and beam or post and beam office building. And so we've converted that with the client's hallmark into a modern office building, because like a lot of these spaces which were abandoned with post-industrialization, all of a sudden, because they became cheap, they were attractive to a lot of creative industries who were looking for affordable spaces, along with, later on. So they basically, creative industries started using up these spaces, and we got to a point where most of the post and beam buildings were occupied already, and we're not building any new post and beam buildings. So, so 60 Atlantic, we reused the existing post and beam, but the client, Hallmark, also owned the adjacent property, which here you see is a parking lot. So how do we take this, what we've learned from the existing post and beam building, and take it to the next generation? So here we see they could have chosen the conventional route, which was to build a larger building out of concrete, but that would have required a lengthy process of approvals from the city. But within the approvable or as of right context, the height allowances, and at the time we were lucky, the building code in Ontario changed to allow taller wood structures. So the client made a choice. We have a limited supply of post and beam. How can we create this new, highly in-demand typology, but how can we make it new? So we looked at the pros and cons of the original post and beam, we're calling post and beam 1.0, along with what does the latest in office technology, latest construction methods involve. So we took what was highly sought after in the post and beam 1.0. We combined it with the modern office construction, made post and beam 2.0. So what we've done is we've used this same, the beautiful wood structure, the post and beam that is so sought after, but we're using modern skin, so a modern cladding system on 3 sides of the building, and then a curtain wall on the south side. And then in order to expose the wood as much as possible, we're using a raised access floor, which is a common modern technique. So you'll see all of the distribution of the mechanical and the electrical passed under the raised access floor, allowing for almost completely unencumbered wood ceilings and wood columns. So this is just a little bit more on the context of the area, because there were some heritage requirements. We looked at how can we take from the area as inspiration. So we looked at the proportions of the windows in these post and beam buildings. We decided, okay, well, we'll use those same proportions, but use a modern language. So, we've got a more randomized pattern. But we want to highlight the wood. So on the south side, we have the curtain wall system, and it's completely exposed to view from the sidewalk. Some of you accompanied me yesterday on the sidewalk tour. We were able to see, especially in good light conditions, you see all of the wood structure exposed behind the curtain wall. This is just a little bit of the architectural narrative here. Because of where we've located the core in the center of the building, and because we wanted to take advantage of the L shape of the 60 Atlantic, we've got a courtyard which generously allows light into the basement of the neighboring building, and there's an access down the ramp into the lobby at the center of the building. Again, we're highlighting the wood here. This is because the separation between the first floor, which is retail, and the floors above, there's a concrete structure up to the second floor. But we have a hung ceiling, which is wood, and so we're bringing the wood language into the lobby. This is a narrative that's familiar to all of you from the weekend, but it's a discussion of the various impacts of building materials. And as we've heard earlier from Dominique and throughout the weekend also, we're not using only one material in isolation, but we're mixing materials. As I said, the first floor is going to be concrete. So that adds into the equations of, what is our long-term impact of this building. All right, so we looked at the carbon impacts of each stage of the building's life over a 60-year period, and we found that our building, as designed, has half the carbon impact of the same building built entirely out of concrete. So again, this is the familiar narrative of not only the embodied energy, but what does that mean in terms of operational energy. So we were very lucky because this is the first building of its type in this new generation. We wanted to make sure that we were doing everything correctly. We were lucky enough to have the participation of the Carpenters Union and their training center to build a mock-up where we were able to test a lot of the different techniques. And as it turns out, the wood was the easiest part, and it was trying to fit together the exciting cladding and curtain wall systems, which took a little bit more trying, but we've worked it out. And then just a touch on here, we're seeing this beautiful NLT in that last slide. There's a debate always about the benefits and drawbacks of NLT versus CLT. The client took a tour on the West Coast, and they looked at a few different examples, and they ended up wanting to go with the NLT, which has the benefit of cost. It's more affordable than the CLT, but also it calls back to the heritage of this area of the warehouse building. This is from earlier this week. Those of you who were there yesterday saw an additional floor on top, as well as twice as much curtain wall. So there, after a few kinks at the beginning, we were really moving very quickly. And then just a last point here. I'm a little early, I think. We're obviously very inspired to make the changes Donald mentioned about, trying to improve our world. But we were lucky enough. I'll try and get back there and stop. No. With this, we have an enlightened client in this circumstance with Hallmark, but they are a private developer looking to make money. So what they found is that even though this building was built on spec without tenants signed up, the character of the wood was a real selling point, and they were able to get above market rents for the spaces, and this is now a fully leased out building, and we still have a few months to go before finishing building it. All right. Thank you. Excellent.
Does Merritt have a presentation? He's going to do a screen share. Great.
Perfect. You're good to go, Matt.
Thank you very much for inviting us. I have built the Skype first. We're working on a project in Toronto, Toronto Region Conservation. We're partnering with ZAS Architects. We have great design team on a base, except for RJC or instructional engineers, the mechanical engineers, B2I, the electrical engineers. We're working as EMIG as civil engineers, and Mark Chong was the landscape architect. It's a great project. We are making a mass timber building, which is also and when we
Merritt, we're having trouble hearing you. I'm just wanting to just see if we can do any better with the connection.
Is it better if I can lean into the computer a bit here?
That helps a little bit, but just know that the internet connection is not strong, so we're having a little hard time. Maybe a little clearer, and if you can from your side, it might help.
Okay. So, without starting over, my name is Merritt Bucholz. Bucholz McAvoy Architects is the main practice, and we're working on this project for the Toronto Region Conservation Authority with the ZAS Architects. Is that working audio-wise?
Hey, Merritt, we're going to try
Yep.
something. Are you able to call some of this phone?
Sure.
Because we just don't have the internet here. It's just not, your voice is not coming through.
Okay, I can, yep, give me the number.
Sorry about this, folks, but we'll just see if we can put this together. Do you have one? Could you call Matt's phone?
Sure.
Wouldn't be charging you. No. Are you able to just to dial through for 5 minutes?
Yeah. Yeah, no problem.
Let's try that. This is hybrid technology, so this is multiple ingredients.
What's the number?
It would be +1 438 491 7866. You want to put this up?
Let's try it. Basically, just put your phone there.
Hey, Merritt.
Hello.
Okay, hold on.
Okay, we'll mute your Skype.
So it's on speakerphone. How's that, Merritt?
Yes, hello.
Hey.
Let's go.
Hi, is that working any better?
It's better, yes.
Well, I definitely have never done this before. We'll continue on. So the project I'm showing a little bit of is the Toronto and Region Conservation Authority headquarters, which is located in the geological, and we see this located in geological time. So the drawing that I have up on the screen is a drawing of the ravines of the city of Toronto. And for us, the ravines are the original place. The site is located on the Black Creek Ravine, and underneath the ravines, which are at the top of the page, in the middle you see the grid of the city of Toronto, which is a beautiful urban grid, but it's quite new. And so we saw the site is located in the past, in the deep past, and in order to, of course it isn't the deep past, it's contemporary time. We are right next to Tennis Canada in this slightly zoomed in view. You see the Black Creek Ravine north is up, and Yorke University is on the right hand side of the screen. But some of our thinking starts in really far back when it comes to timber construction at Amiens Cathedral. And I started the School of Architecture in 2005 at the University of Limerick, and one of the places that we visited was the roof of this cathedral, because the beams are extraordinary. The roof structure is extraordinary. It was made, of course, in 1250, and in 1250 it sits 45 meters up in the air, and you can see the plain of Picardy. There's no topography around here. It's flat. This roof is exposed to the winds for the past 800 and some years. This structure is made out of oak, and the technologies that we are using right now to build our buildings out of wood are just the beginning of what is possible when you think of the extraordinary achievement that was in the hands of the people who made this structure. And a beautiful space, of course, that one never sees. The real cathedral sits on top of the cathedral in some ways. And in Norway, the stave churches, which were built by about 16 people using an axe, This is, well, it's not really pre-saw, but they didn't have saws in Norway at that time. And this is a structure inside of which is hidden and in some ways forgotten, kind of interrupted technological development of connections, of details, of joints, of structural complexity, which we think is really worth looking at. So the connecting the way that something is made and the way that something is studied, in other words, using new technology, using our kind of computer modeling, connecting this to how things are made out of wood has been a real interest of ours. This is a lantern that we made of a project in Ireland, in Meath, for a local authority headquarters. But this is made out of wood, which is hung from a ceiling. But what's interesting about it is this geometry was something that we worked out using a computer model and using a heliodon and a physical model, but was made and the very complex cuts were made with a saw by this gentleman who's very strong, who cuts through the wood. And then we used details that allowed us to adjust on site the geometry of the timber so that it could reflect correctly the light using these pegs. So we kind of adjusted the structure as we finally into its final position using these kind of very manual techniques. And when so part of our question is how can we get closer to the way that we actually can work with wood that combines the things that we know now today, but also brings together the skills that we have from the past. In making our first mass timber frame building, which was in 2011, in Ireland, and I was listening to earlier the discussion about the forests in Ontario. And to give you an idea about scale, 6% of Ireland is covered in forest. It used to be much higher, of course, like the rest of the planet. Much of that was cut down to build ships for the English Navy. But our forestry industry is quite new here. So we were wondering, how can we build things how can we change the architectural design process and build things in our workshop that get as close as possible to what can be done or what is done on sites? How can we think about making connections between timber structures and timber facades at 1 to 20 and 1 to 5 before we get to site and simulate the prefabrication techniques, which are kind of becoming very similar to the skills that we use to make models, and the tools that we use to make models within architectural and engineering practice are used, in fact, to make now joints. And of course, these things go together extremely quickly, almost in a space of minutes. And this is a kind of low energy building, which is naturally ventilated, but also how can we bring the intuitive knowledge that humans have about wood to the understanding of how to use new low-energy buildings, which are quite complex and that don't rely on automated systems. We need to make things make everything recognizable and intuitive, and wood allows us to quickly describe the function of elements and open the inside to the outside. And then how can we look to the past in terms of the technologies which have been around for so long? And this is, of course, in Switzerland, this is shingles. But shingles, we know in Ontario, are made through a number of relatively small producers and typically used on the domestic market. This is very interesting to us. How can we elevate these kinds of claddings that are quite old? In other words, we can bring them into the future and use them to make our buildings today. This is a kind of a hybrid timber and concrete frame building which uses shingles, and these all come from Canada, actually. They're all Western red cedar. At the TRCA, we wanted to bring up some questions about time and construction. How far back in the past can we look, and can we create a bridge between this interrupted sort of story of technology and building? How can we make a building that people will understand how to repair 250 or 400 or even 1,000 years into the future? How can we, in other words, made out of wood, using technologies that we understand today? I won't describe the project in any detail. It's located along the edge of the Black Creek Ravine, as I said earlier. It has this kind of crystalline fan-like form which opens and folds down towards the ravine. It is a very low-energy building. It uses 37 watts per square meter before the plug loads are added, which adds about 20 watts a square meter. It's oriented generally to the south and kind of opens and steps up towards the north. This is a photograph of the models which we're building using our laser cutters to cut the timber frames and think about how the timber structure is stabilized but also opens to daylight and to ventilation. It uses as many aspects of its timberness, I suppose, to be a legible low energy building. And I have some questions that I was really interested in posing to the group about where all of this, where we will be getting all of this wood, because at the moment we're in a kind of tender document phase, and the question of the provenance of the timber is suddenly very much on everybody's minds. And so we're thinking about, well, how can we use, for example, the industry of cladding and the timber, which is the white cedar, which is coming from Ontario. Can we use Ontario timber in making the CLT and the MLT or the DLT or the glue laminated elements? Can we solve lateral stability within the logic of timber joints and construction that doesn't use steel, that can be intuitively understood in terms of how they perform? And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Those are good questions to end yours on. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.
So our time is a little bit short, so we'd like to open questions to the floor, and in absence of those, I would certainly be happy to initiate other discussion. Should I walk around with this though? I just took it away from you, and then it came up here.
So yeah, we just thought let's just roll right into some good discussion from the floor. Who'd like to lead with a question for one of the panelists? For Shane. Alex. I'll do the mic duty here.
Thank you. Merritt brought up in his talk thinking about buildings in hundreds of years from now. And as architects, designers, builders, engineers, what are your thoughts in terms of thinking ahead about the deconstruction of buildings like these? We focus so much on construction, but what thoughts, if any, do you have about programming that kind of future into the design?
Maybe I'll try that one out. Thanks for the question. I think one of the things that I think is important for us to do is to consider the future we may not even know yet. And to act like buildings where they are the instruments that can have a use down the road. So with materials like wood, if we start to see those structures that could be resilient enough such that program is almost kind of, can it be incidental right? As we all know, right now we're living in buildings, or working in buildings that could be 100 years old with a fifth use. And I think it was mentioned just earlier on the last presentation too, that the idea of the future is so important, and it reminds me of this one story that many of you heard about that Oxford school, you know, that after 400 or 500 years, the beetles were eating up the beans, and people didn't know what to do. And of course, people said, oh, just look at the oak grove, because some 500 years earlier, they planted those trees to be the right kind of caliber for what would eventually become this beam replacement. So just knowing that it's within the, hopefully, the architects, designers, engineers realm to think ahead is a good one.
I'm going to steal basically that same idea, but you know, in my pitch, I was talking about Liberty Village and these old warehouses and how, you know, they're now maybe on their fifth use. But think of how recently we were building those buildings and how, you know, unable we were to predict how they were going to change. It's interesting from the social angle. You know, we have no idea how the buildings are going to be repurposed after even such short period of time. So although it's important, you know, to think about impacts, it's hard to predict. You know, try to build the best for today with an eye to the future, but it's very hard to say. You know, our society's changing so quickly, and you know, in the next generation, they're going to have a better idea of how to use these buildings we've just built.
Maybe, you hear me? Well, are you talking about decommissioning a building? Honestly, I never thought about that. I never really cared about what's happening after the building is scrapped, because we think about building stuff, we don't want it to be demolished. I don't know, it never came to my mind, but if there is a building out there that's being a mass timber building that's being demolished, anytime I would go and buy the timber and reuse them. I'm sure we can. I actually did bid on old buildings in the past, so I'm sure there's something to do with that.
Merritt, do you want to address the question?
I'm not sure I picked it up well enough.
Another question, yeah, okay, great.
Yes, we're launching a project called the Mass Timber Institute, and it's co-led by the University of Toronto and George Brown College, and it's very much in support and associated with our tall wood building demonstration projects. The Arbor down in the waterfront, the George Brown project, and the Goldring Center here at U of T. And we're certainly looking at putting together a collaboration between academic institutions and industry. And so I would be interested in hearing from you what you think that institutions such as the University of Toronto, George Brown, Lakehead University, Laurentian University, various academic institutions, by way of a national institute, could help push this sector forward.
I can start. One of the things you're saying, having architects, engineers, and industry working together, I think it comes automatically with wood. First, there's no standard in our industry. If you're doing a steel building, you take a catalog, all the profiles are listed, all the strengths are listed. In our industry, there's almost no standard. Everybody does his own stuff. And so having the industrial partners or the fabricators being there to explain you what's feasible, how to do it early in the process is important. Then, second thing, one of the major difference to me between mass timber and steel or concrete in buildings is the purpose of it. If you're doing a steel building, the steel structure function is to take the loads from the roof to the ground. Same thing with concrete, 99% of the time. With mass timber, you don't go mass timber if you don't want to use it as an architectural feature. So I would say it's mass timber is 50% architectural, 50% structural. So engineers and architect needs to work together. So to be a success, whatever you do, an institute or a project or whatever, we need to sit all together and to work, learn how to work together not working each and every one apart, because we all have something to say in the design. And otherwise, the actual way that construction works doesn't make it easy for mass timber to produce good results. And I mean, if you want to see.
I'm going to take my prerogative to also just quickly jump in on this to Anne's question, because just to say again that the Mass Timber Institute was a huge support initially in this conference this year. And when I heard that the forestry school at the University of Toronto was collaborating with the architecture school and looking for ways to do that, it kind of blew my mind. This is the fourth of these conferences, so 4 years, and maybe before that, conversations like this, to formalize the collaboration at that level is an incredible opportunity. So I just want to make sure that everyone's aware of the intentions and can speak to Anne or to Rob Wright about where that's at and the challenges and how that might move forward. But just to give as much of a boost as possible to that kind of initiative. So go ahead, Jan.
So I'm going to speak as someone who, our firm, most of our clients are private sector, and the project that I was speaking about here today was a private sector developer-led project. So I would say that we heard earlier from Mr. Riccaro at the Home Builders Institute. I think there's obviously a lot of appetite in academia, in the industry, in the professions to get this happening, but we've had good work with the Carpenters, but really hearing the input from the private sector about what it's going to take to move into the next level of we have a huge construction industry, we have a huge construction boom happening here in Toronto. Obviously there's affordable housing concerns. How can we harness all of the great appetite for private developments? What lessons can we learn from home builders or from the developers who are trying this out?
I'd agree with that. I think there's the tendency maybe historically to think the private sector can't be so profound about new ideas. Suddenly now, though, I think it's about advocacy or stewardship, and I would even venture to say that the private sector, and we see with the industry sort of led efforts, they are really coming together a lot more than I would have personally have imagined. And I think it's a great model in which pedagogy and academics, we know that kind of idea, and I think if we could dovetail that together, it would be very good. And we know things like the Canadian Wood Council, Woodworks here in Ontario, we got Sycamore in Quebec, and many other variations of that. I think I got very fortunate about a year ago to be part of what's called the Green Construction for Wood, GC Wood, the applications in which many folks from all across the country were showing their ideas of what would be worthy of giving grants for. But what was really interesting is it was evenly sort of understood that those who chose in the private sector that chose to do it, it was interesting to see, because oftentimes we wanted to know that wood could be proven worthwhile, and I think that's an exciting kind of sort of horizon ahead of us.
Maybe time for one more question. We're about 5 minutes over time. Kevin.
My name's Kevin. I'm actually a master carpenter by trade, and I teach part-time at a private college, construction technology. And you may or may not be able to answer this, but I'm thoroughly impressed with a lot of the mass timber projects. I presume this falls under the ICI kind of category, right? Industrial, commercial, institutional. Where does it fall on the job site in terms of whether carpenters are putting these massive wood structures together versus in a steel situation where carpenters wouldn't be putting the steel together? So I'm fascinated with the process with boots on the ground on the job site, where these job functions fall under, whether it's joinery or carpentry. I don't know if that makes any sense or not, but I'm sure it's a mishmash of a bunch of different things.
I'm going to intervene a bit because Mike Yorke from the Carpenters Union is up next to give a flash talk. But do you want to speak to it quickly first?
I'm going to answer that question with a question. What do you think the carpenters would say? Of course, it's the work of the carpenters. However, but we also had like a history of that. So I mean, like we back that up with, as you say, boots on the ground. We have a training center that's actively involved in training the next generation, specifically for mass timber, and we have people that are out in the field every day doing this work as we've done for hundreds of years. So we see it as a transition from the post and beam, and it's an old mode of construction with new technology, and we see it as, certainly as the work at a Carpenters, and I will also say that by and large the industry sees it that way as well. However, not to say that that issue might not come up on the odd occasion. You're absolutely right to highlight it.
Yeah, I will say that at 80 Atlantic, it has been the Carpenters have been doing a great job there, and a lot of Mike's people.
And can I add something? So I have experience in the erecting of buildings, like from Manhattan to Toronto to middle of the nowhere. My experience is that, okay, yes, it's wood. Wood is wood. A 2x4 and a 2 feet by 4 feet, it's not the same thing to manage, you know. So my experience is that the most important thing that the carpenters have to learn is how to manage job sites, cranes, materials. So what happens is in jobs like in New York City, most of the time the best result we get is by having mixed team of steel erectors and carpenters, because nothing against carpenters, but you guys don't have a lot of experience with huge cranes and super heavy loads and tight areas. So that's what you guys, I guess, have to learn. But at the same time, the steel guys, they will finish the job, and you will see trace of boots on the ceilings, and it's going to be dirty, and they're going to pound with the hammer. And in New York, there was a fight about that between the unions, and the steel erector unions was saying that it's the intent that's the most important, not the material. For example, steel erectors, they do erect the concrete prefab concrete in New York. So I would say we work with carpenter most of the time, but the best team is really a team that will know how to manage the job site well, and you want the crane to be moving, never stopping. That's the...
Is that a good place to end it? Before our last round of, we have 3 flash talks, so 15 more minutes until the break before the John Packel lecture. So I think, unless there's something really burning from someone here, we'll wrap up this panel. Thank you guys so much. So much to think about, and we'll keep the conversation going. So the flash talks for the final round.
Nice.
Thanks, Barry. Well, while this group is coming up, I'm going to demand your attention for just a minute while this is happening. Okay, so how many in the room here have heard of the work of Professor Chad Oliver at the Yale School of Forestry? Are there any Yaleys here, or folks? Okay, so Dr. Oliver was part of the first 2 Wood at Work meetings, and he has been working very hard for the last 3 years, I believe, and possibly more, on a book. He couldn't be with us. He really wanted to be here, but he did send a sample copy of his book. This is bound to be an extremely important book in this conversation, called Global Resources in the Environment. So over the years, as our group has been carrying on the conversation with Dr. Oliver, he's been mentioning different chapters of this book. So he FedExed this to us yesterday. We don't have sale copies yet, but I'm going to leave the book here for folks to look at, and he sent a big handful of leaflets if someone wants a copy, and I think this gives you a discount of 20% on purchasing a copy. So thanks to Dr. Oliver in his absence, and we're very excited to see how this moves the conversation forward. So Mike, are you gonna come up first? Yeah, sure. Okay. So Mike Yorke from the Carpenters Union, as I've mentioned, the Carpenters Union Local 27 was a huge supporter of this event. And as we visited the sites yesterday, it was great to hear the perspective from the carpenters on the various projects that we saw. So really excited to hear what you have to say, Mike.
All right, great. Thank you very much. And the challenge is to Scott and to myself, how do you hold a union rep to 5 minutes? But he's a strict guy, so I know it's going to happen. All right, okay. So I'm going to give a little bit of a travelogue of a tour that we did very recently in the last couple of weeks, along with folks like Cesarbois, Quebec, sponsored by the Government of Canada, Woodworks, and Canadian Wood Council. We traveled Vienna, Graz, Carinthia in Austria, and Trento, Bolzano in Italy, and we met dozens of small contractors, small manufacturers, small wood manufacturers, CLT, went to construction sites, and we had about 30 people from across Canada. It was fantastic. So people like, companies like Ellis Don and larger companies, Bird Construction, which are national, and even small companies like Tree Construction. And so it was really a very diverse group. What drove our interest in this as a representative with the union, but also a board member of the College of Carpenters? We have got our next generation to think about. That's the young men and women that are going to be building our communities, building our cities, building the designs that the people in this room come up with. We have an obligation to them to keep them appraised of up-to-date technologies, and as our industry evolves, we need to be on top of that. We need, as someone mentioned today, following the discussion from Michael Green last night, it's a wave that's coming across the construction industry. I've got a responsibility to the thousands of young people to make sure they're riding that wave in the right way, not getting swamped by it. But we don't do it on our own. We collaborate with many, many people. And here we are back in September out in front of this building with people from Ryerson, University of Toronto at the annual Timber Fever competition. We brought in many contractors that we know. We engaged in great relationship building with the youth that are training here, with our youth, with our apprentices, and that collaboration has held us in good stead. And I know that these young people will be crossing paths for many, many years to come in this industry. So for us, it's a great way to start the relationship. So in terms of starting, our first stop was at KLH Bucholz. It's one of the largest, if not the largest, manufacturer of CLT in Austria. And it's a lot of proprietary information, etc. So photographs were not allowed inside the plant, but it was really an incredible plant. I mean, they were the originators in terms of the relationship on CLT with the University of Graz going back to the early 90s. They started CLT manufacturing in the late 90s, and they're still using the original press, and they've nicknamed it Heidi, as you might expect in Austria. But it's just like craftsmen. They built this press like kind of real craftsman style, but now, of course, it's really high-end manufacturing. But they're not going to give up the original press. Why? Because it's still working. It still produces great CLT. The Forests of Austria. The managing director, Marco Hutter of KLH, he told us that since 1767, under decrees by the Empress Maria Theresa, Austrian forests have been protected in a very systematic manner. So they manage their forests in a way that I've heard today we are looking at doing so in Canada, but really we were so impressed in terms of the approach that they take. Forest management, and it's really integrated in with the industry. So they're very proud of their sustainability, the resiliency that they have within the forest sector and in the manufacturing sector. So they live by that code, and they're extremely proud of it. One of the first projects we went to was the Ho-Ho developments as part of the Seestadt in Vienna. Maybe it's 15, 20 kilometers from Vienna. There's about 20 to 25 buildings under construction. The majority are concrete. And the two on the right are the wood buildings, but again, it's built around a concrete core, hybrid building. And the building in the center is that's all wood, and that's a small commercial building adjacent to the larger, and the taller of the two will be 24 stories in wood, much like the Brock Commons. You see dozens of cranes there. That's a $3 billion development for 20,000 lives and workers. And I'm going to go outside the side. But one of the things that was beautiful for us was the first thing that came into place was the transit. So workers take transit to work. There we are on another one. This is in Graz. Again, 6 to 8 stories. Again, built around a concrete core, hybrid buildings. That's the Pyramid in Kogo, 100-meter wood tower built about 5-6 years ago. And again, 16 wood structural shafts with steel hybrid approach. Again, a fantastic example of what they're doing in forestry in Austria. There we are at the University of Graz. So they really show integration between study, research, and the industry. So, and to great effect as well. Here we are at Haschlager. That's one of the largest CLT manufacturers in Austria again. But this particular plant was glue lamination, and we had a great tour through there. They were a little bit more open with photography, so there's a number of shots there. There's one of the original owners. He had said to us, what they do in Austria is they take small timbers and make small pieces of wood and make massive timbers, in contrast to Canada, where we take massive logs and timbers and ship them away to be made into small pieces of wood. And I put that up there, the product side. It's hard not to love a company with an Eichhornchen as its mascot. Really great. And there we are again, investing in our future. The European Union has invested largely in many of these small contractors and small fabrication plants. There we are again. We had great support as well from the Canadian government. The Canadian Trade Commission was so effective in introducing us to manufacturers, to contractors, and so I give credit to them as well. Then we moved down to Italy, the Trentino region, and again, this is a small community center for bikers and for sports players, but it's in the Dolomite region, and it was just a fantastic example of small scale, but perfectly suited. There we are at Rothelblas, again, an introduction put forward to us by our colleagues in the Canadian Trade Commission. Rothelblas is a global leader in connectors and steel production components for the mass timber industry, and they have a sales representative currently stationed here in Toronto. Exland Dolomite, the largest CLT manufacturer in Italy, but again, small scale, maybe the 200, 300 people. And so what we walked away from is such to see wealth generation and value added makes a huge difference and a huge impact on local communities. So I'm going to end it there and just say it's so important what we had seen, and it sets the bar here for us in Canada in terms of wealth generation, what we need to do in terms of value added to our forestry industry. And we walked away saying, yeah, they are light years ahead of us, but certainly open for communication and partnership and collaboration with us here in Canada. So that's just a short discussion on, or short presentation on the recent trip from the CWC. Thank you.
Hi, my name is David Barmon, and I am here from Portland, Oregon. Real quickly, I wanted to say a thank you again to Scott Francisco. I don't know if those of you know Scott. I've gotten to know Scott over the last couple of years. I spoke last year in Montreal as well, and he's super passionate about wood and architecture. He's a very bright guy, and it's a real privilege to be back here again. So. Anyway, I'm in Portland, Oregon. I own a landscape construction business, Fiddlehead LLC, and I have a urban lumber business called Epilogue, and we mill urban trees into lumber. Anyway, this is a living building project I worked on a few years ago, and I got to actually plant trees on that. It's a pretty exciting project. Anyway, so I found myself one day, I'd hired a flatbed truck to transport this 23,000-pound cedar Lebanon log that was growing inside of somebody's house, and I just thought it was amazing to me that the solution that the tree company had for this until they serendipitously got in touch with me was that they were going to spend all day cutting it into pieces with a 5-foot bar and a chainsaw, and then burning it for firewood, or taking it somewhere to have it shredded with a tub grinder. And that was the plan. So I was able to save it. There's my daughter for scale. It was 8 feet in diameter and very large. I had to trim one side off so we could put it on the slabbing mill. So obviously it'll be tables. I don't know who the heck needs a 6-foot wide table. If anybody in the audience wants one, come talk to me after I'm done talking. Anyway, so we cut urban trees into slabs, started to mill dimensional wood as well. I'll talk a little bit about that more in a minute. This is we built a little bit of furniture as well. This is a table built out of redwood. This is a cherry bench that we built a couple years ago. Anyway, just to back up a little bit, obviously most forest products, most wood does not come from an urban environment. In the Pacific Northwest where I live, industrial forestry is the norm. This is a clear cut for Doug fir. I was up there, I think camping or mushroom hunting or something there. I snapped a shot on a nice day. This is the machine that does a lot of that work. They're pretty amazing. It's a harvester. They can cut down a tree, delimit and deck it in a matter of minutes. But anyway, so you get back to the urban environment. So we think about these trees that we care very much about, and people always have these great stories about trees in their neighborhood, and then they fall over and they do a lot of damage to buildings, and they go away, and there's usually kind of the part of the urban forestry part of the story that is not told. And in fact, across North America, there's billions of dollars of potential lumber from urban trees that is ground up and destroyed. And so it's kind of interesting to think about that. So a couple of case studies. This was a couple of elm trees in front of the library in downtown Portland that I got. One of the trees had a branch failure, slammed in the library, did extensive damage to the windows, and I think the city probably spent $10,000 to $20,000 to cut up the trees, and I was able to save a few of the logs, which is normally not the case. I think that was like 10,000 pounds, but anyway, I'm going to mill those next month. So you think about what does this all cost, and that's part of the equation. Again, it's not discussed very much. Average tree removal in Portland is about $1,000 to $3,000 per tree. So that gets pretty expensive. So you wonder, why don't people want to plant more trees in cities, and why are there shrinking tree canopies? And a lot of that comes down to the maintenance cost of maintaining trees, and also just the removal cost is very expensive. So it's quite a luxury. So you think about, like, you drive along the freeway. This is near my house. It's a very wide swath of land, and it's nothing but grass. That the Oregon Department of Transportation spends a lot of money to mow that, and it doesn't really provide too much of anything. So. But why is this happening? Why are we cutting up and burning and shredding urban trees? Why are we not using the wood? Well, there's a couple reasons. One, a lot of the wood is lower quality. No one thought about growing timber, so we're not, limbing trees or taking care of them in a way that they could be used. We have a very inconsistent supply. It's very inefficient to get logs, and there's high risk of hitting metal. People put all kinds of crazy things in trees, and there's a high cost of maintenance and removal. So, this is what you think about, like what urban forestry is today. You've got a lot of trees that have branch failures, eventually fall over, they do damage, or it's kind of like a sad ending, and then we import wood from very far away, and that's kind of the story. So kind of what I want to wrap up with briefly is just talking about, like, well, what if we plan for the future with urban lumber in mind? So this is a better scenario, I think, where we're actually planting trees closer together. We're limbing trees while they're small, and we can do safe removals, and we can have trees we can selectively on a rotation, pull inventory. Because I like to think, if we can grow food in the city, why can't we grow lumber in the city? So a couple years ago, I got a pilot project funded through the state of Oregon. It's the Clackamas County Urban Forestry Products Cooperative Program. It's quite a mouthful. But anyway, if people want to talk more about that and nerd out on those kinds of numbers, I can do that afterwards. But anyway, I think, like, this is the future, right? And I know this might be sacrilegious for architects. Again, I don't think it's the nicest building, but it's kind of interesting that there's actually vegetation around the building. So, public service announcement, it's okay to have trees near your building. So, but I kind of envision this in the future. So it's like, why can't we grow lumber in our cities. So just as a plant a seed, next year I plan to start a startup company, which will be kind of like the Uber for trees. So if you have non-timber forest land, and you'd like to grow trees for lumber on your property, but don't know about that, we'll be able to help plant, maintain, and harvest those trees in the future. So thank you so much. I'll leave you with a nice shot of my daughter helping me plant some alder trees. Okay. 6.5 minutes, by the way, 6.5 minutes.
Nice job. All right, so we're coming to a close of this session, and we have one last little surprise treat. Every year at Wood at Work, we try to do something that's just a little bit out of the ordinary. Not that everything isn't out of the ordinary here. So bringing an artist of some sort, someone doing something creative. This year, we have a storyteller to do a very short story for us, and this is to kind of just decompress a little. We're going to take a coffee break after this, and before we get ready for the keynote lecture. Sarah's, I think, kicking me that there's not a lot of coffee left, so that coffee break might actually be cafe purchase coffee. Is there anything left from the lunch hour? Anyway, it's going to be a break. It's going to be a break. Walk outside, relax, talk. So I'd like to introduce Brad Woods. And Brad, you're going to do a little introduction of your own, but Brad is a longtime friend and really happy that he was able to join us.
All right, that's on. Thanks. Yeah, doing something different is good. I like being here and listening to all this afternoon. I've realized clearly I was invited here to dumb things down a bit. I don't have any slides or graphs or anything. I'm just here to tell a story. But before I do that, I just want to say, and this is kind of awkward. I'm coming at this from a different point of view than any of you because I'm not an academic or an architect, engineer, or anything. And so it's awkward for me to even say this, but I feel obligated to. I think I should. So I'm just going to say it. If you do have a phone or a camera or recording device of any kind, I just ask that. Again, I know it's awkward, but I just ask that you take it out and get as much footage of me as you can and send it to as many people as you can, because I can use all the promotion I can get. That would be a big help. Usually when I get asked to tell stories, people are looking for something fun, something exciting, stories about pirates and princesses and dragons and that sort of thing. And so I must admit I was a bit taken back when I got a phone call and was asked if I had a story about wood. That's not a typical ask for me, but I saw was so impressed with the conference, and I'm such big fans of the Scott that I gladly got on board. And then I was told, again, like the others have said, I only had 5 minutes, right? And as a storyteller, I think it takes me 5 minutes just to clear my throat. And so then the challenge was to find a story that fits the theme and the timeline. And I thought of a story that takes place long and long and long ago. And if you were there then, you couldn't be here now. And it's the story of an old farmer who is in his final days. He's on his deathbed, essentially. And he's frustrated and angry and very, very sad because his children, his 3 boys, won't stop fighting. They fight about everything. They fight about who will take over the farm and who will handle the finances and who will deal with the cattle. They fight and argue and quarrel so much that they don't actually get any work done. And so not knowing what else to do, he calls them to his bedside and he hands them each a stick and asks them to break it, which, of course, they're able to do easily. And then he hands his oldest son a bundle of sticks and asks him to break that, which, of course, he can't. And the bundle of sticks gets passed from brother to brother, and none of them can break them. And so the father says, you see, those sticks on their own are weak. They're useless. They're vulnerable. But together, they're strong. They're powerful. And nothing else was said. Nothing else needed to be said, because the lesson was learned. I love that little story, and I think it's a great one for today, for you folks today, because it's all about teamwork and cooperation and collaboration. But the best part is that the old man used wood to make his point. Thanks for the invitation, thanks for having me, and thanks so much for listening.
Thanks so much, Brad. So we're pretty much out of time. If there's any thoughts or questions, we could take 2 or 3 minutes for just a quick discussion before we take a break. We're going to reset the room for the lecture, so we can't stay in the room too much longer. But is there anyone who would just like to ask a question of the previous speakers? Or got one? Okay. Conversation style.
So how can design sort of create an ecosystem? Because I've heard about biomimicry, like design that mimics nature. The tree is able to create its own resources and sustain it. So how do we as designers come up with this thought and create systems that kind of lead into other things and are not independent of themselves?
Maybe that's a good question just to sort of leave in the air a little bit. I think that's
Yeah, I don't know if I can answer that. That's obviously biomimicry. That's a whole can of worms there. It's interesting. But I would say this. I think one thing as a landscape contractor that's been kind of great as a platform is that you're building things and you're using stone and you're using wood and that's like a traditional trade, right? But you're also dealing with living things. And so you're actually planting seeds. And like a building looks the best on the day that you build the building. And a landscape might not look good for 20 years or 50 years. And so I think as far as like thinking about that interaction about resources, so you're planting things that grow and change over time. And I think that's been a great teacher for me.
Thanks, everyone. I think let's take any further conversation and questions and interactions out for a break. You might want to walk around outside for a bit. Please be in for the John Patko lecture at 5:30. You can leave your stuff. Yes, you can. If you're at the back, there's going to be some chairs moved around, so if you're back there, you might want to move your stuff forward.